The bird or the cage? The answer seems obvious, but it's not so black and white if all you know of the world are those pretty golden bars of your prison. Hanako Arasaka is sort of a crowning jewel of the Arasaka crown. Beautiful, intelligent, kind, all the things her father ever wanted her to be. All the things she was expected to be. But nothing is ever as pristine as it seems, especially in the chromed up world of cyberpunk. Beauty is, after all, only skin deep, and it can never completely hide the cold steel that lies beneath. Welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we discuss how and why our favorite stories shape our own. Let's get into it. Hanako was born to Saburo Arasaka and his third and final wife, Michiko, who died of complications after her birth. But rather than resent his youngest child, Saburo adored her. Beautiful, polite, smart, and sweet, she was picture perfect in his eyes, and Saburo intended to keep her that way. Hanako grew up in the confines of the Arasaka family compound, an incredibly protected residence in Japan that has been home to the Arasaka family since the early 1900s. Her name, Hanako, translates to flower child, not the hippie meaning of the West, but rather, from what I understand, a literal flower child, as Hanako was the blossom of the family. The logo of the Arasaka family is supposed to be, much like the Tokugawa shogunate of the Edo period, a blooming three-part hollyhock. The dragon has 3 heads, the hollyhock has 3 blooms, and for all intents and purposes, in Cyberpunk 2077, you could definitely argue the blooms are Hanako, Yorinobu, and Saburo. But of course, not all survive the events of this game intact, in most cases. The only way Arasaka stays standing, really, is if they all do. Hanako was educated by the best tutors, handpicked by her father. She was outfitted with the best cyberware and protected by the best soldiers Arasaka could train. She had everything except her freedom. Hanako has never been allowed to be physically free. She only really left the compound perhaps once a month as an adult, and even then, always under heavy guard. She was never really allowed to be alone. Even by time 2077 comes around, it is so ridiculously unheard of for her to even leave Japan. That's why it's in the news. But as much as Saburo physically constrained her, he couldn't quite stop her from net running. This isn't conveyed in-game all that much, but Hanako Arasaka is actually one of the better net runners in the cyberpunk world. She's good enough that she was actually able to understand Soulkiller more than most runners ever had, save the program's creator, Alt Cunningham. Hanako is good enough that she's capable of altering Soulkiller. As Hanako grew up, she found more and more solace in the freedom the net offered her, though she chafed under her father's protection. Hanako always loved her father very dearly, or as dearly as the Arasaka family could. So she put up with all of his constraints and rules without complaint. Although Hanako resolved to live her life the way she wanted to once her father passed away, she would live until then mindful of his wishes. She was even willing to deal with an arranged marriage to benefit the corporation should that need to happen. For her, time and age wasn't so much of an issue as it might be for pretty much everybody else. Hanako had all the best cosmetic and anti-aging cyberware, so she could afford to wait for a while for her freedom. Fun fact, when we meet Hanako in 2077, she is 77 years old. She was born the same year as me, 1999. But if I was in Cyberpunk, I would look like dog shit because I'd be poor. You're not ugly, just broke. But as pretty and proper as she looked, as much as all the gold she wears might try to convey perfection or purity, There is an interesting little reason as to why her fingers are gold. Hanako has Raynaud's disease, one of the main symptoms of it being a lack of blood flow to the fingers. So no, not even Saburo's perfect daughter was technically perfect. But damn it if she wasn't going to try to be. Yorinobu is Hanako's elder brother, sharing the same mother as well as father. While they both had an elder brother, Kei, from their father's first marriage, they were never quite as close with him. Kei ended up dying in the Fourth Corporate War, leaving them the two surviving offspring of Saburo Arasaka. But as close as these two siblings were, they couldn't have been more different. Yorinobu was a born rebel. Even though he's the technical antagonist, or at least one of them in 2077, he's actually not the worst guy. If anything, in the Arasaka family, he's probably the most decent person. When Saburo Arasaka let Yorinobu in on the more darker aspects of the Arasaka Corporation, Yorinobu didn't take to it the way his father had hoped. He was horrified, and he rebelled against his father for a time. He left home, and he ran with his own gang. That's putting his story very simply, as this is a video about Hanako, but I will get more into that whole period of his life in his video. Either way, his dad was not thrilled nor impressed. But even while he was on the outs with his father and Arasaka, he still kept up communications with Hanako. But only through the net, and probably in relative secret. Hanako was kept in the dark when it came to a lot of these family corporate secrets for a long time, but when she was eventually entrusted with them, she actually became one of their most dedicated keepers. Hanako knows a lot about Arasaka's dirty laundry. Her clearance is probably only just next to her father's. As kind and sweet as everyone perceived her to be, Hanako could hold aside her own moral compass, as well as her own desires for her life, in favor of the company, which was treated as an extension of the Arasaka family. This was hammered into her from a very young age. After all, her father raised her so closely to a very ideal line, with him as the sort of center of her universe. To be loyal to that family and to its center above all else. It's really sad. Hanako took that loyalty very seriously. In fact, it was her who convinced her father to accept Yorinobu's plea for forgiveness at Kei's funeral. This temporarily stitched the rift that had formed in the Arasaka family core. But of course, this rebellion of her brother's was already predicted to come under control anyway. A far cry from what he would do in 2077. No matter how Hanako may have advised her brother to mind their father, to remain loyal to the family, and to know his role in it, he had a mind of his own. A lot like his father in that sense, I think. After Yorinobu stole the relic, Hanako accompanied her father on a rare trip outside Japan. This was such a big deal that it was mentioned on the news that she was in Night City. She's kind of an enigma, a mystery, as Saburo's done everything he can to keep his daughter's life as secretive as possible. He never relinquishes control of even her public narrative. And while I do think, sure, a part of Saburo's overprotection of his daughter's reputation could definitely be from genuine care and love, I do think a part of it is because he views his children as extensions of himself, which we see with Yorinobu, but with Hanako, she, I think, is the picture-perfect child, the picture-perfect extension of him. And we do end up seeing this with how she minds her father with her actions later on in the story. She's almost like his secret weapon, his most effective tool that he has made. For somebody to spread rumors about it is probably a dent in his ego, in the same way That ego, I think, is the reason why he decided to announce to the world in the devil ending that he has taken over his son's body, because he has so much of an ego that he would be like, I'm not gonna pretend to be this fool, I'm Saburo Arasaka. An interesting thing to note is that the events at Konpeki Tower were almost extremely different, as Hanako offered to handle things with her brother once again in her father's place. She was willing to broker a sort of peace between the two of them. But Saburo said no. Hanako's ability to ask her father the difficult questions that he avoided asking himself are also what convinced him to not bomb Night City. He did not want to have that discussion with her. Protecting the family from itself was yet another thing Hanako has to do throughout her life, even from her father's ego. But as we all know, Saburo is murdered by his son that night, and Hanako is told by her brother that whoever did it, it wasn't him. Some mysterious assassin poisoned their father. Hanako is suspicious of her brother from the very beginning. This is why Hanako is able to believe V's story as quickly as she does. I do think she was probably aware of Oda's meeting with Takemura and V, and she probably did hear the same story that he did, but this story would have been retold through Oda's unconvinced words and her own grief and confusion. She agrees to give a eulogy for her father in a grand parade in Japantown, where V and Takemura conspire to kidnap her. Now, there's a few things to note about the parade. The song she sings here is called Kojo no Suki, a Japanese song from the early 20th century. While its lyrics can vary in translation, they speak of a bygone age. It conjures an image of the moon and how, as ages pass, the moon remains. It has seen it all. The light of the moon remains unchanged. It continues to shine. In some ways, I can't help but view Hanako as the moon, the one stabilizing force in Arasaka, in the face of all this chaos. The fact that she's almost always wearing white really kind of makes me think of like a more luminous figure. You could definitely see the white and gold that she wears as always being a sign of her purity, how perfect she is in appearance. But of course, underneath, Hanako is a very cold person, I think, able to commit terrible acts and set aside her own softer feelings to do what has to be done. White is also a color that signifies new beginnings in a way, and I find it interesting that at the parade she's wearing red and gold, and red can be a color that represents anger, it can represent heartache and violence even, but it can also be a way of Hanako sort of showing that she's mourning. She's just showing her heart here in how sad she is about what happened with her father. But I like that, she goes from that to donning white and gold. This change of color just shows that she's ready to do what she has to do. She's on a mission. It might be a dress, but in a way it's sort of like her armor. The thing too with all the gold accents she wears is that gold is considered a symbol of wealth, yes, but it's also a symbol of sort of something that's uncorruptible, as gold doesn't really rust. But of course this feels like it goes both ways. For one thing, it does feel like the gold is just hiding the fact that Hanako is a very corrupt person on the inside. But if you look at it from the Arasaka perspective, she is incorruptible. To her father, she is undyingly loyal. I love how her fingers are gold. They're the one thing that is wearing that metal that is supposed to be incorruptible, but in the end, as I'll talk about later, it is through her hands that her brother dies and her father returns. The other thing too I want to note about Hanako's appearance is how perfect and almost doll-like it is, especially when she's wearing that jacket. Like, her hair is never a mess. She's always put together. And then the fact that she does send a doll, more or less, to speak through at the motel. She really is kind of a character with no agency of her own, but it's not just her father's fault after a certain point because of the choices she makes. It's just This is turning into a tangent, but it's just, I do want to feel bad for Hanako because, you know, she was raised to be who she is, but the fact that she does have dissenting opinions of her own yet acts in spite of them just makes me go, girl, no. And my last note on this tangent about Hanako's design is the fact that in Buddhism, one of the more major religions in Japan, is that white represents death. And aside from, you know, gray, the main color that we do end up seeing in the devil ending is white. I don't know, now when I look at Hanako's design, I just sort of see, like, her design was warning us. It's no coincidence that Hanako is represented by the tarot card of the High Priestess, which we find outside the building that Goro Takemura takes her to after she is kidnapped during the parade. And the High Priestess is, as it says in the in-game codex, a card of mystery. It's a woman with a red eye, decked out in white and gold, and she's blocking something. She's blocking something and standing almost on like a webbed surface. And it is said that the High Priestess is, as well as mysterious, is also sort of a cold figure. She is also loyal to the Emperor, a card that represents her father. The other thing too about this scene, namely her conversation with Yorinobu, is that Hanako has always felt like she's had to go along with what her father wants. She's not oblivious to the fact that she's sort of a puppet. Yorinobu has never made her feel like that. She's always trusted and loved her brother, but on the call with him in the float, she admits that with all the things that she's doing in Night City, she's feeling like she's his puppet. In a way, yes, Yorinobu does need Hanako to appear on his side to appease the faction of Arasaka that is loyal to her, the Kiji faction, versus his Taka faction. The Kiji faction is the conservative members of the company, the old techno guard loyal to Saburo Arasaka. Hanako is sort of the vanguard of Arasaka as it was, but she doesn't have the factual ammo to stand up against her brother, nor the total certainty of his role in her father's death. I also want to note here, though, that Yorinobu does love his sister above all else. He's not lying about her safety being his utmost concern, and he tells her that he'll call all these events regarding their father and his death and the corporation off if that's what she wants. I genuinely believe he means this, and she knows this too, which is why she agrees to carry out her role for him. When Takemura shows up and tries to explain her brother's role in her father's death, she denies it. She doesn't want to hear it, and she rejects the tea he offers her after she's been kidnapped by him. But when V starts explaining what happened that night, as well as the fact that they died and the relic is slowly replacing their brain with Johnny Silverhand, she starts to listen. Because Hanako happens to have a big secret herself. But before an alliance can be properly formed, a squad of Arasaka soldiers, led by Adam Smasher, the best person you could possibly pick for a rescue mission, I'm joking, attacks V and Takemura, taking Hanako back with them. V and Takemura, should you save him, end up scattered to the wind, with the former taking refuge at the Sunset Motel. While V and Johnny are lying low, Hanako sends a proxy to find them, through whom she is able to speak with V. She admits there's not much she can do from where she is, and that she fears for her own life since the attack. It's not clear to Hanako that it was supposed to be a rescue attempt rather than an attack on her, but because of it, her trust in her brother is shattered. All this time, Hanako's love for her brother has been what has held her back from taking action against him, despite the suspicions that she herself had about his role in their father's death. But now, she knows that she needs to take Yorinobu out of the seat of power, both for her own sake as well as for the corporation's sake. After all, she's basically under the impression that she is a prisoner or that she could have been killed and that who knows what might happen to her next. She doesn't really realize that Yorinobu never wanted to hurt her, and I'll get into that in the next video. In a way, her father had always held her captive similarly, for most of her life, and now her brother was doing it. Hanako always swore to herself that she would live by her own rules when her father passed, yet here she was, being denied that long-expected freedom in a world with Arasaka as she's always known it. I think that Arasaka is changing so much under her brother is very scary for her. All she's ever known is the Arasaka of her father. She asks V to obtain a copy of Soul Killer and to contact her once they have it. In exchange, she will help them with their relic problem, or so she says. Despite the hold her father had on the reins of her life, Hanako still cared for him. It's gotta hurt her to know that her brother did betray the family, the one thing that she has been raised to never betray, and it probably also really hurts because of the fact that she was so close to preventing it from happening. If only her father had let her go talk to her brother. And of course, Hanako feels scared of what might happen to her, considering how much of the old guard of her father that she embodies. At Embers, Hanako admits to V that she, along with numerous other board members, had always doubted Yorinobu's story. Her love is no longer enough to hold her back. The only way of life that Hanako is familiar with after 87, 88 years of life. A life where Arasaka, her family, has been on top of the world. An empire in practice, if not by name, is about to be ripped away from her. I can't help but feel like her father knew exactly what he was doing, making her so reliant on the world she knew, even if she aspired to be free someday. A taste of this new and free world that she dreamed of was enough to convince her that maybe things weren't so bad in the first place. Hanako, in her mind, has to push back, or else she would be a prisoner forever if she wasn't killed first. Hanako explains that there is a chance of an actual coup, a successful one, with the support of much of the board, but she needs V's testimony. Now, she's withholding a lot here. This lady is withholding so much, and she never stops withholding. There is a reason her tarot card is the High Priestess, with all of her mystery and secrets and manipulation and loyalty to the Emperor above all else. After her rescue from Arasaka Manor, where she's being held, Hanako heads to Arasaka Tower, with V, Hellman, and hopefully Takemura. And here, we learn the secret Hanako's been keeping, the reason she needs Soul Killer, and the core of the reason why she was so interested in V's experience with the relic. Her father's engram exists in Mikoshi, and she intends to bring him back, though she doesn't quite spell out that last part as much. The combined retelling of V's perspective during Saburo's murder, as well as the word of Saburo's engram, ties the bow on the board and places them under Hanako's thumb. Yorinobu's Taka soldiers attack, however, killing much of that board, though, with V's intervention, Hanako survives. She has one major order for V and Takemura. Not a hair is to be harmed on her brother's head. If he is killed, V will get no help with the relic, and will, I guess, probably be killed, I would assume. When V gets to Yorinobu, though, he doesn't fight. He doesn't even have the strength to take his own life. He just has a gun with one bullet in it, and he says it's not for you. So Hanako arrives in the room with Yorinobu, and at first, it appears that she's comforting her brother in his final moments, before he is imprisoned or killed. Some players say, however, if you look really close at the siblings as you're walking away towards the elevator, Hanako slips a certain chip into her brother's head. I can't say that I've noticed that, but knowing this game, I wouldn't doubt it. I will try to capture it, but if I don't, then you're probably just gonna see like a picture of my dog. Yeah. The devil ending is not a super common one, I think, from what I understand. Most people never go for it, but it kind of rivals the Phantom Liberty ending for me as my favorite ending because I like the depressing endings. I don't know why, I don't know what's wrong with me. But the implications of why V is on that space station, why the tests are so rigorous and unending, is even darker than what is outwardly spelled out. I think the reason why Hanako agreed to help V deal with the relic in exchange for their testimony, as well as, running around and getting Soul Killer and all that, is because of the fact that V died and had their brain rewritten by the construct on the chip. The reason why that's interesting to her is because it's exactly the process that needed to happen with Yorinobu's body, as V is the first to have this consciousness change occur. I do think all of the research done on V, all the tests, readings, everything, are what helped Saburo to take over Yorinobu's body as cleanly and as quickly as he did, aside from the fact that, as we are told, there is a tissue compatibility, as, Yorinobu and Saburo being father and son. I believe that Yorinobu was always intended to be a vessel, at least for so long as relic tech has existed. Maybe that's why he fought so hard against his father, against Arasaka. Maybe that's why he saw him as a monster. Hanako says Yorinobu does not know his place. Perhaps he did. And perhaps Hanako would have furthered his line of potential hosts. Hanako was raised to be the perfect vessel for his future vessels. Like, really, she was educated and conditioned to be loyal. Her reputation was kept spotless. She will be young and beautiful and will likely live far longer than her father did. She knew what to do with the engram when the time came. Who knows what else Hanako knew? Maybe she always knew that what happened with her brother here was always bound to happen somehow. She was just trying to avoid admitting it. Maybe Saburo always knew it would go down like this, and that's why he had the relic made and everything. Hanako Arasaka, while by no means a morally upstanding character, is far more fascinating than meets the eye. Beneath those golden fingertips lie the corruption hidden within. Hands that gave her father new life, while taking that of her beloved big brother, for the sake of her family, for Arasaka. V was never a key player in Hanako's game. V was just a very important guinea pig. She used and led V on, and once all the work that she needs from V is done, she just drops them cold. She doesn't pick up V's calls, she doesn't answer any of V's questions. She never cared, and she's showing that. All Hanako cared about was the family. She did tell us this in Embers after all. She basically leaves V for dead once she gets all she needs from V, and sends Takemura to V with a treat on a stick to get them out of their hair. She is indeed a corpo ice queen. And considering the fact that we see Saburo speaking through Yorinobu's body on the news, V was an invaluable resource that has reached its expiration date. Hanako emerged from her cage just long enough to fix it, to dupe a merc dumb enough to believe that yes, this corporate princess, this mysterious high priestess character would absolutely help them. And once the work was done, she set aside her own feelings and her own dreams, hopped back in, and locked her cage door behind her. But when you think about it, given everything her life has been, and the very small sphere of what she's known, it's unsurprising that she took away her one and only chance at freedom. A gift of freedom that her brother tried so hard to give her, the sister who would ultimately take his body and give it to the ultimate monster of their lives. River Ward is one of the more polarizing characters of Cyberpunk 2077. His story feels rushed, which is a shame considering how his questline is actually kinda unique. His romance comes out of left field, however, and the level of trust he develops with V feels really sudden and not at all organic. Almost like there was, once upon a time, supposed to be more. And if you've ever had that same sort of hunch, you may very well have been onto something. Welcome to Shaped by Stories, where sometimes we take a trip into the fictional morgue and dissect the stories lost on the cutting room floor. Put your gloves on, guys. This fiction forensics is a messy one. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's first go over the character we know as River from the final game. River was a detective with the NCPD, motivated to join the force by the murder of his parents, witnessed when he was just a kid. He has a strong sense of justice, a rare thing in Night City, and this is what drove him to be the determined cop he is. The police never found the thugs that killed his parents, and River swore that he would do everything he could to save other families from that same injustice. He would not stand for the NCPD's usual incompetence. He would stand against it. Despite all the obstacles River was up against, he stayed true to this promise. But, of course, time on the force made him see that it wasn't so simple as basic incompetence. The Night City Police Department is corrupt and, overall, underfunded. A lot of the officers chafe against the corporate red tape put up by those that pay off their superiors to look the other way. Many join the force to do good, but are inevitably prevented from doing so. River stayed on the force for a number of years, dealing with the suicide of his partner and the repeated thwarting of his investigations by the NCPD brass. He did his best to juggle caring for his sister and her children, standing in as a father figure a lot of the time, but was determined to catch as many criminals as he could. His work began to consume him, so much that it led to a brief estrangement between him and his sister, Joss. Of course, River was thinking of justice night and day, the justice that he never got, that his family never received. In a world so twisted and wrong, a fact he would come face to face with each and every day, why wouldn't he want to just see one thing go right? River ended up getting a tip that Night City's mayor, Lucius Rhine, was in danger. River managed to save the mayor's life from this would-be killer. But later that night, Rhine ended up dead anyway, from what the police called a heart issue. But River was, of course, suspicious, especially after he was told to drop it by his superiors. But he kept pressing. He and V meet through Jefferson Peralez, who River did some work for. And yes, I will be talking about Peralez in this video as well. V and River uncover that Rhine was actually killed by a spiked BD. River tries to get the case reopened, only to be suspended from the force. He and V then go on this detective goose chase that is actually a very well done quest. You have to rescue River's nephew Randy from a really messed up serial killer kidnapper. So long as the rescue mission goes off without a hitch, you get invited to a family cookout with River and his family. And it's actually a really sweet quest. I really enjoyed it. But if you're playing female V, it quickly becomes really awkward. So now that we've gone over the plot, I just want to outline why I don't think River's plot and romance work well. Because on its own, I really enjoyed River's quests. They were quite interesting and fun, a very different change of pace from the usual cyberpunk vibe. You're helping out this rogue detective. You're solving a mystery. River actually seems like a well-intentioned yet layered, severely traumatized guy, and his voice actor does an amazing job. As a character, I found him really interesting, and I genuinely wanted to know more about him. But then, before any more build-up, you get slammed with this awkward romance that doesn't really feel deserved. You go from being a stranger in the first mission to "you're the only person I can trust, let's save my nephew from the milkman," to "let's bang." And if we don't, I'm gonna be kinda salty about it. At least that's the vibe that I've always gotten from River when I reject him on that tower. It just feels so weird. Like there's no real romantic buildup, and there's not nearly enough friendship buildup. It just kind of feels shoehorned in at the last second, just so female Vs can have a male romance. This rushed romance and forced chemistry almost kind of damages River's overall story, at least for me. It feels like we're missing a lot. And wouldn't you know it, the internet thinks so too. And there are some very, very compelling theories about just what the hell happened to River in the writer's room. And you'd never guess that those theories surround Goro Takemura. Cyberpunk 2077's cut content is a, so far, never-ending story. During the game's development, a lot of plot lines were rewritten, and there were entirely new additions to its story late in development. But River is a unique outlier in this situation, where the opposite is kind of what happened. First, let's take a peek at River's concept art. You can see that the original River was a much older gentleman, not unlike Takemura. He even has more cyberware in these original designs that kind of resemble Goro's. While they're ultimately very different in their final looks, when you compare them side by side, you can still see some little details, like the beanie, that might call back to River as the root character. Even I'll admit this is the weakest point of evidence, and that's why I placed it first. However, what I find most fun about this point of the concept art is that in the Phantom Liberty credits scene where you get a call from Takemura, he's decked out, even down to his hairstyle, in one of River's concepts. You could argue that this is just recycling a look, because they needed to show just how time in Night City had changed Takemura. But it's interesting that they'd choose a River one specifically. But I also want to note some of the more professional-ish designs here, specifically with the blazers and whatnot, because they do tie in nicely with another account of what River's story once was, and it had to do with an investigation into Arasaka, back when River was once known by the name Sobchak. I apologize for my probably poor pronunciation of that name ahead of time. You're gonna be hearing it a few times. I'm gonna do my best. Hidden in the game files, a Reddit user named Lara the Dev found that River was often referred to by the names of Sobchak and Sobchak in scene titles to do with his quests in the final game. But it's not just Lara that made this discovery. There's countless other people who found Sobchak in scene data to do with River and Takemura. The most interesting use we see of this name is in the title of the scene where Takemura kills Dex and rescues V, titled Visions and Sobchak. Many believe, just based on what's still buried in the bones of Cyberpunk 2077's code, that River, back when he was called Sobchak, was actually supposed to find V at the dump, not Takemura. At this point, Takemura didn't even exist yet. Hello, Liddy from Post here. Sorry about the audio sounding a bit different, but I had to put this in. When I was looking for all the posts mentioning Sobchak or River's original name on Reddit, I came across this particular post, which led me to this concept art by Cyberpunk artist Luke Poehler, who worked on the game. And so this picture that I'm showing you is an illustration for an inside presentation of Cyberpunk 2077's story posted by Luke. And you can see here that River's original design with his bandana, beanie, and his jacket, finding V in the dump. This is really interesting because considering it must be really early concept art, we can see that at some point or other this version of River was supposed to save us. Anyway, back to video. Considering how close to the dump that River's family's trailer park is, it does kind of feel like a natural next stop. Aside from, well, a Ripper doc. Maybe River was investigating Dexter DeShawn about what happened in Pacifica. Maybe he would have shot Dex, or maybe Dex already would have been dead. This would have tied River into the main questline, something lacking in the final game. River is, in fact, the only romance not connected to the main questline in any way. Even Carrie technically is, considering Johnny. From there on out, River would have been involved in an investigation into Arasaka, at least based on the trail left by the ghost of this Sobchak character. Maybe he would have helped you to hunt down Dexter DeShawn, to get some revenge, maybe answers. River might have been the one to help you get info on Evelyn and Hellman, instead of V's goose chase in the final game. Judy, apparently at this time in development, did not have nearly as much content as she does in the final game. It would make sense that River's later decrease in plot relevance would open up the space she ended up getting. In the final game, Judy is the romance with the most quests involving her. River is at the bottom with only 3 quests. Panam is actually the next lowest, in fact, at 6 quests. River still would have been a cop in this original story, and he would have been investigating Arasaka. What this investigation would have covered is hard to tell. Apparently, River was still involved in the Peralez quests in these earlier drafts, as other people who've used the Wolven kit have found quite a lot of cut Peralez content as well. But the Peralez quests were not supposed to be how you met River. I actually think that instead of you meeting River through Jefferson and Elizabeth, it would have been the other way around. In the final game, it's Judy who recommends V to Elizabeth Peralez. Insofar as I know, you can only find that reference in an easily missable dialogue with Judy, as well as an email exchange between her and Elizabeth. If Judy really did get a lot of extra content after River's deductions, it only makes sense that they'd use her to tie up some otherwise loose ends left by this mysterious Sobchak. Maybe River was more tied into the main questline originally, perhaps by connecting you with the Mr. Blue Eyes plot. Maybe this would have tied into the cancelled Crystal Palace DLC that they're hopefully going to be recycling in Project Orion. Maybe there was a whole other ending planned to do with AIs, if the Mr. Blue Eyes theories are to be believed. It just feels odd to me how the Peralez quests bleed into Rivers and then both of them die off relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things. They seem so ominous and foreboding, it just feels like there was once so much more. Why did they take away all this character development? This natural buildup of a romance that feels very pushy and awkward in the final game. Why did they take away the organic steps that would have led to a believable friendship between V and River? In regards to River's mystery Arasaka plotline, it was simply decided that River didn't feel like the right fit. His plotline was intended to provide the tie into Arasaka that Takemura ultimately does, though through a sort of vigilante detective lens. And so, late in development, Takemura was born. This is actually a fact that has been confirmed by the devs, that Takemura was a last-minute addition to Cyberpunk's final story. He is ultimately a way more interesting character than River because he got the bulk of River's quests. There's a reason why people wish Takemura was romanceable. It's because he got all the character development that was robbed from River. According to Reddit user Benzen Zimmern, who is actually a dev at CDPR who worked on Cyberpunk, Takemura was considered a potential romance option, but they ultimately decided against it because they simply didn't have enough time to give Goro a good romance. And that makes total sense. You gotta choose the main questline part over the romance part. And while I'm glad that they did decide to focus on that, it does suck that they kinda half-assed River as a result. The Perales quests were chopped with a few key rewrites to introduce River. I do totally understand why they ended up doing what they did with this part of the story. Time was running out and there was only so much they could do. Rather than cut all this content that was a lot of fun quests, they left in what they could salvage. It's just a shame that we're left with some of the most unfinished feeling quests in the entire game. Even if all of what I've said above is just hearsay with the theories about River, that doesn't change what a lot of people feel. That we've lost something in River's story without fully knowing what it is. We're left with a character that I think gets a lot of hate due to unfortunate editing mistaken for poor characterization. But there's one more key aspect to River's role that was supposedly removed from the final game. And it is, in my opinion, the biggest loss of River's cut content. River being a foil for Johnny Silverhand. According to more dedicated data miners, River's character wasn't all that different from the River we got, in the sense that he was dedicated to justice. River still worked with the police, as he does in the final game, despite knowing they were corrupt, because he wants to use their resources to actually make a difference. I will say, it's nice to see those moments where River is a nice, caring guy, he just wants to do the right thing, he despises injustice. Sometimes when I listen to Takemura's discussion of morals and the importance of why one gets their hands dirty, compared to River's drive to bring justice to Night City in spite of the NCPD, you can see almost a fork in the road between these two. There's a lot of parallels between their personal philosophies, and while that could just be two realistically written characters in that sense, people do have common opinions. It could also lead back to a shared root in the writer's room. In the original plotline, River would have apparently clashed with Johnny. Whereas Johnny would have despised River's ties to a corrupt system, River would have hated Johnny's violent radicalism. While we do see some ideological jousting, sort of, between Takemura and Johnny in the final game, and Johnny being mad if you sleep with River because he's a cop, you can't help but wonder, if this is the truth, what we missed out on here. Some data miners say that they found some old quest paths that implied you would have to choose between River and Johnny in the end. And it's all such a shame, because in realizing that River isn't so much a victim of bad writing as he is the cutting room floor, leaves me not feeling annoyed at River. It leaves me going, we were robbed of a healthy male romance for female V? Regardless of whether or not the theory presented above is fact or fiction or a bit of both, one thing's for sure, some plotline surgery went wrong somewhere down the line. And the whole point of videos like this is to point out it's not just the writing of the bulk of the story that's important, editing and revision are just as important for a seamless experience in a creative project. We could have had a long series of quests that led up to River's romance. We could have had time to get to know this guy, to better understand his unique backstory, and appreciate what he was trying to do in an otherwise helpless place. River and Judy both feel like a pair of romance options for a V who likes the tragic paragon of justice, whereas Carrie and Panam are more chaotic. Despite River's short story, a number of people still like him, and I get why. Because when you do break down elements of River's story and pretend the more awkward bits actually have proper pacing and build-up, it's unique. I think it would have been a lot of fun if we just had more time with him. But you only, in the end, kinda know River, and suddenly he's like, I love you! What happened to the broody, good-hearted cop we were supposed to know? I honestly get semi-Garrus Vicarian vibes from this guy, but it will never fully come to fruition, and it makes me sad. As good a game as Cyberpunk is, It's a shame to see a character who once had a lot of potential be left as dismembered as River on that cutting room floor. Yorinobu Arasaka, the patricide, the rich kid, the screw-up, and the fool, is anything but that simple. And dare I say, he is one of Cyberpunk's most tragic, heroic figures. The first time I played this game, I didn't really realize all the facts, and I didn't really notice all the details that were hiding between the lines of the story. I got duped into seeing the world from V's perspective, where I was just a down-on-my-luck merc, and it was all because of the corpo overlords and all that. But as with any great story, each review or reread or replay makes you see things that you did not realize before. Hello, my name is Liddy, and welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we discuss how and why our favorite stories shape our own. Let's get into it. Yorinobu was born in Tokyo in 1995 to Saburo Arasaka and his third wife, Michiko. As the second son of the Arasaka family, Yorinobu didn't have the same expectations of leadership that were laid upon Kei, his elder brother. But he still had access to the best education, the best technology and living conditions. Really, he wanted for nothing, and he probably lived the best quality of life on the planet. And while being a member of the Arasaka family probably wasn't the most loving family experience, Yorinobu had a deep bond with his younger sister, Hanako, a bond he especially treasured after the passing of their mother. Like Hanako, Yorinobu grew up with no idea of the extent of Arasaka's darkest ventures. And he wouldn't know until he was 21 years old, when his father took him aside and told him about the family legacy. Yorinobu, horrified to know his family's dark side, fled into the streets of Tokyo, vowing to fight against his father's work. He formed his own nomad gang, the Kotetsu no Ryu, also known as the Steel Dragons, who joined him in trying to take Arasaka down. Yorinobu worked towards this goal in Japan for years, and while his insider knowledge of the corporation came in handy, it was difficult for him and his Steel Dragons to actually make a long-lasting difference. When it all came down to it, they were just a gang in the streets of Tokyo and sometimes beyond. But to his credit, Yorinobu had quite the knack for building connections and forming strategic alliances with those who also saw an enemy in Arasaka. He was quite a thorn in his dad's side, even right up until the Fourth Corporate War. Militech actually tried to recruit Yorinobu during this time, despite his blood ties to their most major competitor. But first, before we get into that, we have to talk about one of Yorinobu's oldest promises, and certainly his most cherished goal, in all of this freedom fighting and hatred directed towards his father: the safeguarding of his sister, Hanako. Hanako and Yorinobu are super close, and I think this is due in no small part to Hanako's forced isolation in her childhood, which I get into in her video. The only other kid she probably had around consistently was her brother, as her father cut her off from the outside world. Yorinobu was very protective of his little sister, and she was often a source of sympathy and comfort whenever he was at odds with his father. Even as he cut all ties with his dad and his brother when he ran away, he still kept in contact with Hanako. They'd only meet up through the net, Hanako's only source of freedom, and they would always do so in secret. Yorinobu swore very early on in his crusade against Arasaka that he would give Hanako her freedom someday. According to lore, she never knew of this promise, and he probably didn't tell her because he knew she'd be resistant to it. As I discuss in my video on Hanako, she was raised to be loyal to Arasaka and her father, so long as he lived, at all costs. Yorinobu loved his sister, and he never stopped working towards this goal of getting his sister her freedom, something that she's never really had. And he still holds on to this goal, as we see in 2077. Keeping this promise he made to himself in mind makes the rest of his story, right up to the end of the devil ending, a real gut punch. When the Fourth Corporate War rolled in the years 2021 to 2023, Yorinobu refused to join any corporation, Militech included. But he did screw Arasaka in a really clever way. He actually lent the Japanese government a hand in nationalizing Arasaka's assets, something that almost certainly annoyed his father and his brother. But Yorinobu wasn't some hapless dreamer. I can't help but feel like Johnny Silverhand's planting of that bomb in Arasaka Tower was a wake-up call of what he had to do. The only thing that would work when it came to destroying Arasaka. Tearing it apart inside out. Yorinobu had worked for years in the streets of Tokyo, running with his gang, trying to make a dent in his father's company. And while he did have some success, which I think is important to note, that's kind of crazy that he managed to do what he could do with the resources that he had, he realized it just wasn't good enough. He knew he needed to be welcomed back into the fold of the family, but how would he do that after everything that he'd done? Well, his brother Kei died during the events of the Fourth Corporate War, and Yorinobu cleverly used this time of grief and vulnerability to bring himself back into the family fold. Without Kei, he was the next oldest kid, technically a prospective heir to the more traditional Saburo. Hanako was essential in this, as she's the one who softened her father towards a reconciliation. Without her, Yorinobu wouldn't have been welcomed home, but ultimately he was. And he would bide his time until his moment to destroy Arasaka from within would come. In the meantime, he formed his own faction under Arasaka's banner, the Taka faction, but he would play this political game far more carefully than before. Now, before I get any further, I feel like I should note and clarify that I don't think Yorinobu is this spotless hero with pure morals and has never done anything wrong. He has, and in that sense, that is what makes him a lot more like V, who I will also be discussing at the end of this video. But I specifically want to talk about his relationship with Evelyn Parker very briefly. Yorinobu, despite everything and his negative feelings about where he comes from, has spent a lot of his life being used to just getting whatever he wants and probably doesn't think too deep about everything. For instance, Yorinobu became connected with Evelyn through clouds, which is connected to the Tiger Claws, who are connected to the Arasakas. Anybody who's played the game and those quests with Evelyn and Judy has seen how the Claws are towards the people that work for them. Evelyn's fate and how she's just sold as scrap to be abused and used is unfortunately just one small example of how bad the Clouds and the Tiger Claws can be. Maybe Yorinobu wasn't aware of the abuse that goes on at Clouds, but I feel like if you're somebody who's been running with a gang in the streets of Tokyo, you would have to know, right? In a way, he almost kind of got honeypotted by Evelyn in the sense that she used that situation and the knowledge that she had of Yorinobu's secret goings-on behind the scenes to her advantage. I don't believe that Yorinobu knew that Evelyn was working for the Voodoo Boys or that she was trying to take the relic out from under him. I think that Yorinobu is, sort of Game of Thrones reference, not as smart as he thinks he is. I think he's very clever. We've seen the way that he operates back when he was working against Arasaka in Tokyo. But even he could not plan for anything, in the same way that I think Saburo Arasaka couldn't quite plan for everything either. It's already established that Yorinobu isn't perfect, he's not a genius, and when we see him and how he operates throughout Arasaka as the questline goes on, we can see that he's kind of out of his element. He's not as canny as I think he wishes he was, otherwise I think his takedown of Arasaka would have been a sure thing and much more organized. I sort of find Yorinobu's conversation with his father a bit amusing because of what he says to his dad, that you think the world revolves around you, to paraphrase, but I feel like Yorinobu has a similar idea. It's just his father is the villain and he is the hero of this story. I mean, I definitely think Saburo is unarguably evil. He's definitely not a good guy. But I do think, unbeknownst to Yorinobu, he operates his life as if the world revolves around him. He's got some ego too, and he's like his dad. I see a lot of similarities between him and Saburo, and it's just they're two people with the same sort of weaknesses and strengths on opposite sides of the board, including opposite sides of the board in terms of experience. He's a guy who thought he was capable of far more than he was, with far less resources than he realized he needed. In another world, without his individualistic streak, I think that he would have ended up being a lot more like his father than even Kei Arasaka was. But I think the key driving force in what makes these two men ultimately different is the fact that Yorinobu does seem to be more empathetic, for sure, than his father, and we'll get to that. But anyway. By 2077, although Saburo and Yorinobu had that brief reconciliation, father and son did not get along. Apparently, it's been some years since they've actually met face to face. They were still having their intercorporate shadow wars, and Yorinobu was going in for the kill this time, as carefully as he could. Well, maybe his plans didn't involve him going literally for the kill as he ended up doing, but he did cook up a really big plan in 2077 that was supposed to be a pretty big hit to his father's plans. Using contacts that he had made at Netwatch, Yorinobu made a deal involving the prototype relic, a biochip that stored the engrams of people's consciousness. This was considered Arasaka's greatest technological achievement. And this relic in particular happened to have the engram of Johnny Silverhand, an old enemy of his father, the guy who bombed Arasaka Tower. The real question of this whole deal, though, the nature of it, is never outright confirmed. It's kind of hard to really tie it all together. So, let's try and speculate a bit, based on what we know of Yorinobu. First and foremost, Yorinobu wants to destroy Arasaka. This hasn't changed. He certainly doesn't need money, and there's never any discussion between him and Netwatch, at least that we can find, that talks about payment like that. Evelyn is the one trying to sell the relic to Netwatch, not him, as we can find on the Netwatch terminal in the GIM. So wealth is not the motivator here. One could argue that the tech, in and of itself, has some sketchy things going on, just in how it was made. If an unethical bridge needed to be crossed, you can pretty much guarantee Arasaka would cross it. You could even argue that Mikoshi as a whole might be something Netwatch would be interested in accessing, as it's basically full of sort of AIs. But I think the main thing here isn't so much the relic tech, as it is Johnny's personality. And there's a couple avenues regarding Johnny's importance in the plot that I want to discuss. First, Johnny's engram is something the Voodoo Boys desperately want. They want to contact Alt Cunningham, and Johnny is the best way to do that with the least chance of getting immediately fried by Alt. Netwatch, on the other hand, wants to take out the Voodoo Boys. They want to stop them. The Voodoo Boys are playing around with the Black Wall. It's just not a good time for anybody. Perhaps Netwatch wanted Johnny instead, maybe to lure Alt out themselves, or to stop the Voodoo Boys from doing the same. So there's that. But also, so long as there's no other copies of Johnny lying around in Mikoshi, then Arasaka wouldn't be able to talk to Alt either. When I was looking a little deeper at it, there's actually an email from Netwatch to Yorinobu that basically shows that Netwatch didn't ask for Johnny Silverhand. They were actually like, why must Johnny Silverhand be on this biochip, after Yorinobu insisted on it. And Yorinobu says that he would tell them why. We don't really find out why. So I don't know. Did Yorinobu know somehow that Johnny was key to contacting Alt? I don't know. That feels like it's on really shaky stilts as is right now. So maybe this theory isn't the most solid. All I can really do is speculate, and please, by all means, tell me what you think in the comments, because I'm trying to spin this out too. I'll get into more theories about the biochip and Johnny and everything in Saburo's video. I don't know. This is a puzzle, and I would love to hear what you guys think the real reason behind all of this is. There's no way Alt is just of interest to the Voodoo Boys and Netwatch alone. Alt was of great interest to Arasaka before her untimely death, and she's almost certainly of even more interest now in her AI form. One cannot deny that Alt is a very, very powerful entity. If one could shackle her, then you may very well have the whole net at your mercy. She did, after all, help create the Black Wall. Arasaka, given its motive of domination, would have jumped at the chance for this, I think, if they ever realized it. Maybe they already did, and they were working towards it. Whatever the truth, I do believe Yorinobu was doing what he thought was morally best, and I do think he enjoyed the idea of pissing off his dad on a more egotistical level. While he seems to have his heart in the right place, I think Yorinobu has a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Most rebel types kinda do. It's that level of egotism you need, I think, to be a proper rabble-rouser like Yorinobu. He's not unlike his dad in that way, of being like, fine, I'll prove you wrong, I'll do it myself. Saburo leaves Japan with Hanako, with the plan of confronting Yorinobu about this theft. Hanako did try to convince her father to let her do the talking, but her father denied her request. Hanako had been trying for years up to this point to get her brother to accept his role in their family. She tried to hold her father and brother together for decades, but that rope was frayed beyond repair. During this confrontation, Yorinobu snaps and strangles his father. Maybe his hatred had boiled over in this moment now that he had his father so close and so vulnerable. But maybe Yorinobu's fear of him had finally driven him to this point. Strangulation is a very personal and passionate way of taking someone out, and I think that this action went beyond just the level of father versus son. I think it was something much deeper. The reason why I think Yorinobu was mortally terrified of his father is not just because of the power his father wielded, but I think it's because Yorinobu knew that he was supposed to be a vessel for his father. That is what the ultimate purpose of the relic was. I don't think Yorinobu knew about this from the beginning, all the way back in his early 20s. I can't see his dad choosing to spring that on him, knowing how individualistic Yorinobu was. Maybe Hanako is the one who told her brother in hopes that maybe she could get him to accept his role as a vessel instead of fight it. This explains why Saburo forgave Yorinobu for all the things that he did and ultimately welcomed him back into the fold, especially after Kei died, because this was the last tissue-compatible male relative he had, the last proper host. I think Yorinobu knew that this was to be his ultimate fate, should he fail to destroy Arasaka in time, and he lashed out and killed his dad in a mix of desperation, terror, and hatred. After all, this discussion takes a very harsh turn, with Saburo more or less resolving to punish his son in an unspoken way. So, if Yorinobu didn't do what he did, who knows what would have happened? I could totally see Takemura at full strength taking out or neutralizing Adam Smasher if it came to blows. Saburo could easily just give Adam Smasher whatever he wants to look the other way while he took Yorinobu out of action. After the murder, Yorinobu scrambles for damage control, blaming a mystery murderer for poisoning his father. He gets rid of Takemura, a huge threat, by sending him on a goose chase that would lead him to V. In the meantime, Yorinobu would get a grip on the reins of Arasaka. He would fabricate a very flimsy story as to what happened to his father, a story that everybody, including Hanako, doubted from the get-go. But everybody was largely powerless to do anything against Yorinobu. In Hanako's case, what held her back was her love for her brother, or so she says. In charge of Arasaka at long last, Yorinobu wasted no time in changing Arasaka for the, in his mind, better. He removed facilities, changed plans that were long laid out, flipped countless people's lives upside down, determined to remove Arasaka from its seat of world power. He still did everything he could, however, to keep up the premise of mourning, of his innocence in his father's death. He organized a parade in memory of his father, with his sister, Hanako, as the celebration's centerpiece. So long as Hanako appeared on the side of her brother, the Kiji faction, the traditionalists of Arasaka, wouldn't have as nearly a compelling figurehead to rally behind. Now, Yorinobu promised a long time ago, as we know, to free his sister from the shackled life she lived under her father. He still intends to do that, and he cares very deeply about her safety and comfort. When Hanako expresses to him that she feels like his puppet, with the parade and all the public repping she's being told to do, Yorinobu tells her that, if she wants to stop, he would never force her to continue. And I do believe he's being sincere. He knows that Hanako does hold a lot of power, but he's not interested in being just like their father, directing her here and there and just expecting her to follow along. As much value as she may present to his role at the top of Arasaka, he values her as his sister far more. He himself was terrified of life as a puppet, a literal puppet. A literal meat puppet. And he's strongly against the world his father desired to create. I can't see Yorinobu wanting to repeat that with the person he holds most dear. After Hanako is kidnapped, Yorinobu sends Atom Smasher to get her back. And while Smasher's not the first person I would assign to a rescue crew, given his nature and also his name, he's definitely scary enough to make people think twice about taking Hanako again. Yorinobu makes a public statement, threatening death to whoever seeks to harm another member of the family. But Hanako doesn't see this as a rescue attempt. She sees it as a capture, an attack, and indeed she kinda is captured. Basically, Hanako is stuck under guard of her brother's men after she is retrieved. Once again, never allowed to be alone, and unable to leave Arasaka Manor for more than that visit to Embers. A visit that can last forever, depending on V's choices. Hanako feels, already, like she's under threat because of her brother. She is, again, a prisoner of somebody else in her family, all in a world that is rapidly changing from the Arasaka that she's always known. Hanako once swore to herself that when her father eventually died, she would live the way she wanted to. Yet now that her father was dead by murder at the hands of her brother, she was now being denied her chance to live the way she wanted to. I do think Yorinobu wanted to keep her safe, as well as to keep her away from those who wanted to use her politically, but all this did was backfire and make her determined to stop him. Even if it meant she'd be back in her golden cage, at least it would still be the same golden cage as before, not in a world where all there was of Arasaka was ashes. Also, with this bit of him taking away Hanako's freedom in an effort to give her, and I guess himself, a degree of freedom too, I'm kind of forced to ask, how important was Hanako's freedom to him in the end anyway? Was it more important than his own? Was it ever? In a way, in the shoes of the Arasaka CEO, which kind of makes me think of the giant robe that he's wearing at the end. It's like, it's way too big, but he's forced to be in this role where he now has to make these giant decisions that his father did. I can't help but look at it like, I think he does care about Hanako's freedom more than his own. It's just, he kind of feels like he has no other choice but to imprison his sister against his own promise to himself that he would never become this monster that his father was. And in that sense, he sort of sealed his own fate should you choose the devil ending. It's an unfortunate misunderstanding and lack of communication between Hanako and Yorinobu, but also I can't blame him for not communicating with Hanako because Hanako is brainwashed, in my opinion. So I doubt it would have made that much of a difference. I don't know, again, his whole story is just tragic. In the meantime, Yorinobu is trying to speedrun Arasaka's rapid decline. Yes, I said it, he's speedrunning rapid decline. He's really trying really hard right now. He knows. He can feel the walls closing in around him. His story is crumbling. It's basically nothing. There's people pursuing him. His sister is making her own plans. And I think he knows that Hanako is loyal to her father's memory, but I don't think he realized exactly that his dad was in Mikoshi. I feel like he would have destroyed it. Yorinobu makes a plan for a full military coup of the company, and this includes ordering his Taka faction to take out all the rival factions throughout Arasaka all across the world. It's full-blown civil war at this point. He's panicking and things are looking shaky as shit for him at the moment. Now, from here on out, there are two ways the story goes for Yorinobu. The first way is that he mostly succeeds in his mission. In every ending but the devil ending, he deals immense damage to Arasaka. While he doesn't entirely destroy the company, the corporation loses a lot of its former power and wealth, and its relic program falls apart. This bit regarding the fall of the relic program actually makes me wonder if Yorinobu did indeed know of his potential as a vessel, and if he is the one who put Johnny on the relic prototype. Maybe he did so both to annihilate the chip for his own safety, and also chose Johnny's engram as a middle finger to his dad. Johnny was a pain in the ass for Saburo. Probably not as much as Johnny believes he was, as we know that Johnny is not the most reliable narrator, but it would still be an extra dig that the chip would be wasted on Johnny, of all people. In these endings, however, Hanako also dies in her own failed coup that would have otherwise succeeded with V's involvement. And Yorinobu is pretty devastated. Despite everything, he loved his sister, and I'm sure he feels like he failed her in regards to giving her the freedom that he promised he would someday deliver her to. And in a way, death is sort of the only freedom she does get, considering what happens in the devil ending. And that's very dark, but it is the dark truth of Hanako Arasaka. In the devil ending, Yorinobu's life ends horribly in a twisted half-death. He is ultimately defeated, and by time V gets to him, he's on his knees, wearing a sweeping robe of black. It's not entirely unlike the posture and appearance of a samurai preparing for seppuku. But there's less of that ceremony that it's often depicted in art and whatnot. He's done. He's broken. Yorinobu has a gun by his side, but he says that the one bullet in it isn't for V. But he can't even pick it up to do what I'm sure he was intending to do with it. Yorinobu didn't enjoy any of what he did at the top of Arasaka. It was necessary, but it wasn't something he relished. Yorinobu doesn't ultimately take his life, but instead lays his head in his sister's lap. The lap of that person who was most precious to him, saying that she always appeared when things were at their worst, almost like she was always there to soothe him. She was the one saving grace and silver lining of any bad situation. As V staggers away after Hellman, Yorinobu tells Hanako that he is simply tired, and as she tells him to rest, she slips a familiar chip into his neck. I found somebody on YouTube who zoomed in and found this animation, which is otherwise really hard to see, and I'll put it on screen here with credit to the user. It's crazy. It's just like, there it is. But I love how the chip just kind of like goes woo up the screen when I guess the elevator goes down. That made me laugh. Eventually we see the results of this moment of defeat. Yorinobu's body is on the news, but it is his father's words that come out of his mouth. Saburo Arasaka announces that he has returned after Yorinobu gracefully handed over the reins of his flesh to his esteemed father. All of this occurred through the golden fingertips of his dear sister, who he came so close to delivering to ultimate freedom, alongside himself. But I don't want to end the ending discussion of this video with that, because in the Phantom Liberty ending, he gets a very fitting ending, one that's not unlike the star ending that V can get. By time 2079 rolls in, Yorinobu is kicked out of the company by the board, who identify him as an internal saboteur, and he runs away with a band of nomads, maybe even his steel dragons for all we know. And while he mourns the loss of his sister, he can at least live on as a more free man, with the knowledge that he did take Arasaka down more than a few pegs, even if he couldn't ultimately destroy it. Now, to end this video, I want to highlight just how important perspective is in Cyberpunk 2077, especially when it comes to Yorinobu. I mean, perspective is the most important narrative function in our brains. That's how we view the world, from our own perspectives, but I just love how Cyberpunk used that to both trick us, but also to make the game even more interesting on subsequent playthroughs. As V, we are the protagonist. As V, we seek to save ourselves, and find ourselves placed at odds with this guy who, as V always says with disgust, killed his own father. As V, we play as a character with a deep distaste for corpos. Whether we're nomad, street kid, or former corpos ourselves, V don't like them rich kids. And honestly, there's not a lot of in-game reasons to like them anyway. Not even Meredith, at least from our perspective as people in the streets. We see firsthand the damage corporate dominion does to everyday people. We see the huge canyon between rich and poor. We see the filth and death and violence in the streets. We see people struggling to survive in the dirt of Earth while people look down on them from space. We see how unfair life is for V, for Jackie, for Misty. Pretty much every character we can meet in this game is depicted in a tragic struggle against the world around them. And their stories almost always end with the city winning every time, and these people just end up at most taking the small comforts they can. Such is life. All V sees throughout their story and throughout their life is the people at the top. The people who keep people like them down in the dirt. And yeah, especially on a first playthrough, it's super easy to get caught up in that me versus you way of thinking. But it's only when we do the devil ending and go against our better judgment, when we side with the corpo machine, which predictably backfires, that we see Yorinobu is someone who's not all that different from V. Yorinobu may have been born in the lap of luxury, but he despised the corporate machine his father presented. We see someone who fought against great odds, seeking success at great personal risk. We see someone whose very soul is threatened throughout his story, if not just by the relic, but by the moral conflicts within himself. We see how Yorinobu reacts to killing his own father, too. He's not happy or cold about this. He's shocked. He's terrified, and he's like, oh god, what the fuck have I just done? That's because he's not a sociopath. He's not a saint either, but he's able to care. Yorinobu loses his father in Konpeki Tower regardless of how he felt about the man, and that's still, for any human, a horrible loss and experience. V fights great odds in search of their own version of success. V's soul is being torn apart, both by the love and loss that persists throughout their story, as well as the relic rewriting their very person. They're being jerked around, not sure of any of what they're doing. Driven only by the drive to survive, but also torn by the limited decisions they face, the costs that they have. V lost Jackie at Konpeki Tower, their best friend, when they were so close to having everything. And then V loses their own life, only to get revived with Johnny in their head. Both V and Yorinobu desperately want to live, against all odds. And while sure, neither character ends up with their goal perfectly completed, considering Arasaka isn't exactly completely destroyed in any of these endings, and for V always loses something no matter what they choose. They still kind of get somewhere a little better in every ending but the devil ending. They both have their own possible star ending, where they flee with the nomads, and they can both lose everything and die in despair, together, in a way, in the devil ending. An ending where they are betrayed by the one person who could, if they wanted to, if they cared to, choose to help them. But instead, chose to make everything both these characters did all for naught. Yorinobu is not an evil person, just as V is not a saint. Both characters, in another world, another life, could have worked together. And they probably could have somehow succeeded in both of their goals, in the way that none of their endings as enemies ever do. They might have even been good friends. And that is a future that we will, unfortunately, never see. Such is the tragedy of history, even in speculative fiction. Strength is a funny thing. Classically, it almost always has positive connotations. It's been a trait of heroes and saviors for as long as humanity has gathered around the campfire. But the flip side of strength can also be seen as stubbornness. A strong will can be rather annoying to some. Bravery can be seen as recklessness, and restraint can be seen as naivete. Strength can even lead you down a destructive path and blind you to other alternatives. The Aldecaldos are a nomad band of strength on loud display. From the rumble of their engines to the shouting matches straight out of a family gathering, these nomads are not afraid to argue what they believe is right, as well as to put their money where their mouth is. But there is one among them who, despite displaying the greatest strength of will of all, is torn by her own doubts. It's a struggle for her to rein it in, to temper her steel and wrestle her fears, to ultimately open her heart in order to fully hone her resolve. A resolve that, for a clan on the edge, is the only thing that can pull them back from the brink. Founded by Juan Aldecaldo in the 1990s, the Aldecaldos are considered the first true nomad family. Their formation began as a response to the lack of safety and freedom in Los Angeles in the cyberpunk version of the 1990s. The lower classes there were sick and tired of struggling to survive. They lived in despair, surrounded by rampant crime, with no protection from the authorities. Not all that different from today in many, many places, and certainly not that different from Night City by 2077. The Aldecaldos began as some of the most disadvantaged people in society, but by time 2077 has rolled around, the Aldecaldos are one of the largest nomad clans in the country. They're relatively peaceful and mind their own business. They just want to be able to survive in a way that keeps them free of corporate control, safe from the parasitic existence of most cities. The Aldecaldos roam the Badlands, never staying in one place for too long. And it's not like they're welcome to either. Many people, especially in the NUSA, hold negative views of nomads. We see this in V's Nomad intro with the sheriff being a douche. An important thing to note about nomads is just how deep their hatred for corporations goes. While not every nomad is born into a clan, many are descended from farmers whose land was bought up or stolen by corporate interests. Many nomads as well are of Native American descent, and this includes Panam. Native Americans have an extremely long history dealing with the brunt of corporate and government oppression. This fact could very well have been an influence on Panam's staunch opposition to any form of corporate control. But this is just speculation, as we don't really hear a whole lot about Panam's background in the game anyway. But there's no denying the influence of this fact and experience on nomad culture. The Aldecaldos also have a long-standing rivalry with the Raffen Shiv, wraiths they unfortunately share the Badlands with. But unlike the Raffen, the Aldecaldos are not murderers. Many among them may not have any love for city dwellers, but they're people who would rather help a dying stranger in the desert as opposed to shooting them or torturing them. The Raffen are just generally horrible. Either way, the Aldecaldos don't look kindly on those who would try to stomp out their life of freedom. They don't look kindly on the idea of serving those entities that made their lives a living hell in the first place. So you can imagine just how well things go when somebody tries to do just that. Panam Palmer was an Aldecaldo from childhood. We don't know anything about her parents or if she was born into the clan, but she was pretty much raised by many of the members. Like all kids of the Aldecaldos, Panam was able to grow up in relative safety, experiencing a freedom that most kids in Night City could never imagine. This no doubt has lent to the development of her extremely independent spirit. The open roads and sands of the Badlands were Panam's first friend, though of course she had other friends too. One notable incident from her childhood actually involved her best friend at the time being kidnapped by Raffen, only to be rescued just in time by fellow Aldecaldo Cassidy Ryder. After this point, Panam looked up to Cassidy, whose more cut-and-dried methods of doing the right thing, no pun intended, rubbed off on her. But Panam also looked up to fellow Aldecaldo Saul Bright, the leader of Panam's family by 2077. Panam grew up hearing all the stories of Saul's adventures and all his exploits in his youth, and she wanted to grow up to be like him. In Saul, Panam saw a brighter future for her people. Again, no pun intended. Panam grew into a decisive young nomad, one who began to butt heads with the man she had once idolized. Saul Bright has some unconventionally conventional ideas about the direction the Aldecaldos should go. Saul is a more politically minded leader who tried to look at things far in the future. Despite his more muscly appearance, Saul played political games, and in a way, this did help his family survive leading up to 2077. The clan was struggling by the time he took the leadership reins, and he knew he had to come up with a plan to save his family. But Saul had a different, more cautious mindset than many other members of his clan. A large number of the Aldecaldos consist of veterans of the corporate wars, experiencing the worst the corporations had to offer. They saw villages burned, cities blazing, all in the name of profit and consumption. For those returning after the war, or just joining up with the Aldecaldos, they wanted as far away from corporate influence as possible. But Saul was not a veteran. He didn't see the horrors that his fellow Aldecaldos saw. This led to a lot of decisions that ruffled the feathers of his closest friends. Though to Saul, any sacrifice was worth it so long as it kept his family afloat. Life as a nomad isn't easy, but it's a life spent among family, living independently of corporate rule. a thing that Saul was very near to violating in order to save his family. Before the events of 2077, Saul moved his clan right outside Night City, and Panam followed him. She actually says to V in the star ending that the last time she crossed that border, she did so with hope. She wanted to believe in Saul, even if other people might not have wanted to go to Night City, for understandable reasons. Saul sought a long-term relationship with Biotechnica in order to ensure more consistent pay for his family. Saul actually wanted to get technology that would enable his clan to farm in the Badlands, allowing them some long-term independence. The terms of this arrangement, however, became increasingly constricting and very unfair, and the Aldecaldos were feeling it. But Saul was not interested in hearing opposing viewpoints. His eyes were on the future that he really wanted his clan to have. If they gave a bit of their freedom now, they would have more independence in the future. Or at least that's the thought process. Saul would actually go so far as to punish members who suggested alternate routes of survival. After he returned from the corporate war of 2070, Scorpion made a suggestion that the Aldecaldos maybe sign on with Snake Nation, saying that there was strength in numbers. Whatever Saul's reasons are for disliking Snake Nation, he did not appreciate this suggestion from Scorpion. Saul didn't give him any work for a whole year, more or less ostracizing him from what made their way of life work. Many felt that this ongoing arrangement and bending over backwards for Biotechnica and Saul's near despotic approach was bringing them closer and closer to the corporate slavery that the Aldecaldos wanted to avoid. Panam Palmer was the loudest of all the dissenters. While Panam wasn't necessarily advocating for joining Snake Nation, she fought Saul tooth and nail over his ideas. She was just as bullheaded and just as stubborn as Saul. While Panam herself didn't have many other solutions, she echoed the sentiments of the family at large, that it was better to struggle on their own terms than to submit to corpo overlords. But Saul would not budge. It is a classic case of rock meets hard place. And so Panam left her family for a time, headed into Night City to live the life of a merc. She actually got into the afterlife, working under Rogue, often pairing up with supposed fellow nomad Nash Bane. But this all went downhill when Nash turned out to be a wraith, and he stole her Thornton and took their cargo for a job they were gonna do, leaving Panam hung out to dry. The first time we see Panam is in the afterlife. Panam is giving Rogue hell, and you understand why. She had no idea she was working with a wraith, and Rogue had no sympathy for her situation whatsoever. But despite Rogue's indifference to Panam's struggles, even Rogue admits that Panam is a very competent mercenary, even if she's mouthy and impulsive and kind of annoying. Rogue connects V with this trusty, vibrant nomad in order to help them get a hold of the root of all of V's current problems, Anders Hellman, the creator of the relic. But of course, no plan in this game ever goes 100% smooth. When we meet with Panam, she's working on a junky car that she nabbed to replace her stolen wheels. And you can tell almost immediately that Night City is not the place for her. Panam is frustrated with Rogue, with the car, with the morally bankrupt ways of Night City. Nomad life with the Aldecaldos is a far cry from the life that a street kid or Corpo V would have been used to. Panam's experience in Night City has been a rude awakening. Panam left her family out of frustration, and you can tell that this absence eats away at her. But she found herself at a loss for how else to handle her anger at Saul and his inability to listen to other opinions. I think a large part of Panam's struggle to meet in the middle with Saul, and I think this is also a thing he struggles with too, is that they both have a difficult time being vulnerable. And I don't just mean emotionally vulnerable. These two people, as we see throughout our quests with them, are extremely stubborn and very set in their ways of thinking. They're both argumentative and they can get fired up really quick. I'll dig into this more as we go, but I think it's really worth noting right now that Panam and Saul are super similar. Panam offers her assistance in helping us get Hellman in exchange for us helping her get her car back. V agrees and joins her, while Panam makes a stop at the Aldecaldos camp to see if she can get some help from her old friends. But Saul gave orders that no one is to help her. But that doesn't mean that Mitch and Scorpion are not above giving an indirect hand to Panam, letting her loot her stuff from around the camp. But the way Panam trudges around camp after this and picks up all that stuff has the same feeling as a kid who just moved out, who needed some help from mom and dad, but was told they were on their own. It feels a bit petty. The other Aldecaldos in the camp still acknowledge her, however. Many of them ask if she's gonna come back. If anything, I'm willing to bet that many saw her as the only advocate they had for their own opinions, and the only other person who was strong enough to go up against Saul. Panam and V get her truck back, taking out a bunch of wraiths in the process, but Panam wants to go one step further. She wants to take out Nash. She wants her revenge. Nash is a really interesting point to note about Nomad's strength. As we see through Panam and Saul, this strength can come from and end up in a good place. But Nash, in being in charge of a bunch of wraiths, shows how it can be warped into something ugly. Wraiths are almost always the worst of the worst. Murderers, abusers, take your pick. They take what they want from whoever they want, and they don't care who they harm. I think it's important to note these two sides of this kind of strength, but also to take a look at Panam's desire for vengeance. While sure, taking out the Raffen is always great, Panam has very strong impulses and she often feeds into them, namely in the beginning of these quests. And that, in and of itself, can be a very dangerous thing. Not to say that Panam is anywhere near to being like the Wraiths, but when you look at someone like Nash, you can see what happens when you lean hard into your desires. After taking out Nash, Panam makes it a point to call Rogue, where she gloats about how she's won and she's got the cargo and blah blah blah. But Rogue bruises Panam's pride by not even caring and calling her out on how her impulsiveness has landed her in this situation, how it's not always worth chasing. This is an interesting point for Rogue, in my opinion, because as we see in some of the endings, Rogue joins you in raiding Arasaka Tower. You could absolutely argue that this was done on impulse and out of emotion, but at the same time, Rogue has seen how being impulsive can lead you down a bad path. Look at what happened to Johnny. This lesson could have been how she remained alive for so long, being strategic. I just think it's interesting because it definitely can look like Rogue is being a hypocrite here, but this piece of advice is really important for Panam, as we see later on. Either way, Panam is pretty miffed by Rogue here, and V can actually comment on Panam's distaste for authority figures. It's our first glimpse into her past frustrations with Saul. Panam grates against authority, and I definitely think this is due to her independent upbringing. And this independence is what has allowed nomads to survive. So it's not at all a bad trait to have. But Panam struggles with her own emotions and managing them. She is still angry about Saul, and she gets even more riled when she feels she has been failed yet again by another authority figure. But I will say that I think that Rogue busting Panam's balls here was a really important moment for her character. Rogue is not in the wrong for telling Panam to clean up her own mess. She's not wrong calling Panam out on her greatest weakness. her impulsiveness. Is this nice? Is it fair? Maybe not. But I do think that Panam takes this to heart, in the sense that her plans following the Hellman mission tend to have more careful and thoughtful planning from there on out. But we'll get to that. I also think it comes down to the simple fact that Panam is not congruent with Night City. Someone's word doesn't mean anything here. It's void. It's nothing. Not even cash is a guarantee of fairness. Night City is a snake pit. The Aldecaldos are a family. The afterlife is a business. Panam is just trying to eke out an independent existence. She doesn't want fame. She's not motivated by that. And she's realizing very quickly that this life is not for her. Panam helps us get Hellman through a crazy plan that actually manages to work, even if it requires some snappy improvisation. Panam is quick on the fly, and she's very clever. She can adapt in a flash, and it is awesome to see. But Panam didn't account for her fellow Aldecaldos and friends, Mitch and Scorpion, going to check out the crash. She didn't expect her comms to fail due to the rusty specs of her old Thornton, rendering her unable to warn them that the people on board were Kang Tao. Panam and V arrive at the crash site too late to save everybody. Despite being injured, Panam fights with us to save Mitch, though Panam is devastated to find out about the loss of Scorpion. Panam blames herself for the deaths of her family members, though Mitch, the only survivor, does not for a single second. This is the first moment where we really get to see the very rare kind of familial bond that exists among the Aldecaldos. Mitch's first concern is Panam and her injury, and making sure that she's okay when he's almost been kidnapped and shot and killed. I also can't help but wonder here if Panam remembers how Cassidy arrived in the nick of time to save her best friend all those years ago, when compared to her own failure to do so now. You can see Panam harboring some deep self-doubt here, and there's some conflicting questions going through her head. Panam, despite her grief and her injuries, joins us in getting Hellman back and taking out Kang Tao in revenge for the Fallen. In fact, even if we ditch Panam and don't even help her at the AV, she still shows up at the gas station where we find Hellman, with all the Aldecaldos, having rescued Mitch herself. Because, for Panam, her word means something. Loyalty means everything. V first meets Saul here, and Saul scolds Panam for her role in Scorpion's death. While V and Mitch can defend her, Saul makes it clear that an Aldecaldo is always responsible for their own actions. Panam feels hopeless and lost, especially when Saul threatens casting her out completely. Though Mitch does reveal that this is more or less hot air. It's Mitch who tells us that Saul was the one who rallied everybody to come and rescue Panam. Saul was genuinely concerned for Panam's safety. After the Aldecaldos depart, Panam heads back to Night City. She continues doing mercenary work and hemming and hawing about whether or not she should go back to her clan. Scorpion's death hangs over her, as well as her role in it. Panam reaches out to V through text, expressing her own doubts and confusion. Panam is torn between creating change herself and simply hoping for it. Is she not good enough to do anything right? Is she incapable of listening to others, like Saul? Was Rogue right, imparting some useful honesty for this merc who she herself admits is great in spite of her flaws? But despite her conflict, Panam comes rushing home as soon as word comes through that Saul is missing. The Aldecaldos have lost their leader, and nobody is really sure on how to handle the situation. Saul's been taken by Raffen, and the Aldecaldos, for one thing, can't afford all-out combat. They can't leave their camp undefended, as they've already lost a lot of numbers due to the wraiths. And so Panam, with V's help and Mitch's drone, manages to free Saul from the clutches of the Raffen. Panam doesn't care about the limits or the dangers. Panam knows that Saul went to the wall for her, and so Panam would absolutely go to any extent to save Saul. After Saul's rescue, they hole up in an abandoned farmhouse. With a sandstorm raging outside, Panam and Saul bicker like family. They still struggle to agree about the clan's future. But when Saul says he's going to bed, Panam sasses him and he sasses her. Saul is still comfortable enough with Panam to make that remark about haboobs. Even if there's some trouble in the Aldecaldo leadership structure, it's still sort of like that semi-toxic yet loving family structure. The next day, Panam decides to rejoin her old clan. Despite the differences she and Saul still have, Saul invited Panam back himself. As Panam rides off into the sunrise, you know that the debate of the clan's future has not ended here. But at the very least, Panam is now going back to where, in her heart, she knows she belongs, and a bit wiser for her experiences in the meantime. As expected, Panam has new ideas and new gumption. Panam has spent enough time around the Corpo hotbed of Night City to know that the clan should stay as far from corporate leashes as possible. The clan, with the influx of Wraith attacks and Saul's kidnapping, needs to be able to better stand on its own. And many of her people agree, even if they do so quietly. Behind Saul's back, Panam and Mitch locate a Militech convoy, carrying a Basilisk tank. An insane piece of firepower that would provide a lot of safety and peace of mind for the clan going forward. But Saul is vehemently against anybody going near it. The last thing the clan needs in their current condition is to make an enemy out of Militech. And so Panam calls V back to camp to fill them in on her big plan to get the tank. And she's also supported by some of the other clan members, Carol, Cassidy, and Mitch among them. So long as V is loyal and doesn't rat out their plan to steal the Basilisk, the plan goes off without a hitch. They get the tank, and they leave the convoy vehicles next to a Raffen camp to shift the blame. The next day, the tank actually repels a Raffen ambush when V and Panam are in the middle of taking it out for a test drive. They save the Aldecaldo's camp, and even Saul cannot deny that Panam made the right call. And it's following this event that, to Panam's shock, Saul names her co-leader of the Aldecaldos. Saul also admits that he was going about things wrong, echoing his own sentiments that every Aldecaldo needs to take responsibility for their own actions and mistakes. And also, Saul recognizes in Panam what is also a very important trait about himself. Both Saul and Panam are willing to risk everything for the good of the clan. Saul and Panam were both willing to risk everything to save each other. Both learned to overcome their own personal hurdles to meet in the middle. For Panam, her own self-doubt and uncertainty. And for Saul, his tunnel vision and one-track mindset. While Panam can also possess a limited viewpoint, she and Saul together are a great pair. They both balance each other out, and I think with time could really understand each other. And they both care about each other and everybody in the family. For both of them, it is not about holding on to power, it is about doing the best possible thing for the Aldecaldos. Even Saul's acceptance of Panam's strength here is a very important plot point for the both of them, because Saul is leading by example here. He takes to heart the opinions of others, finally. Something incredibly important, and something I think he remembered how to do because of Panam. But Panam can also take from this the wisdom that comes with admitting when you're wrong. something that Panam really struggles with. To be vulnerable like that is no easy thing. It's interesting how a fear of vulnerability can really stunt a person. How a fear of an uncomfortable conversation can drive a wedge in there that doesn't need to be there in the first place. However, there is another aspect at play here. One that Panam isn't super well versed with. Saul is playing politics. But before we get into this bit, let's discuss what I think is V's best romance. Panam's. Panam's romance, I think, is the best romance for V, and it really is quite sweet, especially when you pair it with the star ending. Panam herself even says to V that she's not comfortable with tenderness or expressing a more vulnerable side, but she wants to try to do that for V. That's one reason why she sort of takes things slow with V. Panam's whole quest line surrounds growth and vulnerability. Saul does that through admitting he was wrong. Panam does this through her romance with V, as well as her more subtle changes to how she acts throughout the story. And V can choose to carry on this torch, specifically in the course of the star ending, which is, without a doubt, the best ending for V. As a character, V kind of seems more independent and not given to asking for help. Even when Panam says that whenever V might need her, she will be there. So if V does the hard thing and chooses to call Panam for help, she is there. Panam is there, no hesitation, basically no questions asked, aside from where am I picking you up and where are we going? Loyalty is an Aldecaldo specialty, and there is no way that Panam would ever leave V out to dry, romanced or not. And the same goes for her family. On the surface, Saul knows that if Panam ever struck out again on her own, there was a huge risk of a fracture, splitting the clan in two. And that could very well spell disaster for a lot of people. While I do believe that Saul sees a lot of potential in Panam, he's also motivated to raise her up because of more subtle reasons. In the star ending, Saul can actually pull V aside and admit that he's not helping them out of kindness and loyalty, like he sort of advertises. He's doing this for Panam, and by extension, the clan. He knows Panam would leave if he turned his back on V, and the clan needs to be united. He recognizes the gravity of the situation that he's bringing his people into, but he knows the clan's fate is even worse if they split. Panam herself is also sort of weirded out by Saul's very sudden agreement with everything she says in this ending, but she's not as politically minded as he is. She's a straight shooter, so she doesn't know what to make of it. This is also why so many people among the Aldecaldos like her and respect her. What you see is what you get. Panam is incredibly nervous about leading, especially in this raid on Arasaka, and she doesn't want to let her people down. Even to a V that she's simply friends with, she shows this vulnerability, which to me demonstrates that she's definitely a good person for a leadership role. But you kind of feel a little uneasy at what you know about Saul's motives, especially considering how the other clan members have reservations about how the two have been cooperating. Like, is this a sign of bad things to come? Or is this a sign that Panam could someday learn some of Saul's tactics and become a better leader because of it? Also, the veterans, like Carol, Teddy, and Bob, can actually explain to V that Saul is using the raid on Mikoshi as an opportunity. The clan will be able to get some wicked tech from Arasaka, which will make them lots of eddies. And while this might undermine this ending's nice moments, like Sol making V an Aldecaldo, it doesn't undermine Panam's joy in you joining her family. Whether you're romancing her or you're just friends with her, she is literally ride or die for you. She's the only romance option to go to bat to join you in the ending. And you don't even have to romance her, you just have to show your own loyalty and friendship throughout the game. And it's so important to realize that over the course of the game's story, V has lost so much. V has lost their closest friend, their hopes and dreams, their future. The star ending is the only ending that, in my opinion, gives more to V than it takes. Panam and Sol join V in raiding Arasaka Tower, until they reach the doors of Mikoshi. Here, a wild Atom Smasher appears, but Sol blows his chest piece to bits with his shotgun, point blank, giving V and Panam the advantage that they need to beat him. All before Atom Smasher stomps Sol's head into a puddle, his final words being that of the name of his clan. Panam screams bloody murder, and together you avenge Sol's death, as you should. For me, Sol's death is the saddest in the whole game. It was even sadder for me than Jackie. This guy went out like a champion. And with his final breath, he declares his undying loyalty to his family. And it's doubly horrible because Panam is destroyed by this. She basically just watched her big brother figure get, squished, Auburn style times 10. And by Night City's most bloodthirsty psychopath, you feel horrible for her. From there on out, the ending where V then returns to their body is the only ending where Panam sticks with V. In the star ending, you leave Night City with Panam and the Aldecaldos. And Judy, if you romance Judy and you're playing female V, she can come too. But whether or not you romance Panam, you know that she and her family will do everything they possibly can to at least ensure that V's final days are spent in comfort, and also to try and find a cure or a fix if any such thing exists. V can now, at least, live the remainder of their days enveloped in the strength of a group who has the guts to care. And I also want to say, it makes so much sense story-wise that V would advocate to Panam to return home to the Aldecaldos, given how little of that warmth that V has in their life, how Night City is so empty and cold. And in turn, with V helping to guide Panam back home, she gives V the opportunity to have a family too. But of course, the other endings have a lot of important things to note about Panam. For starters, if you do leave Mikoshi with Johnny in V's body, Panam swears vengeance. Whether or not she'd actually carry it out is another matter. I think Panam would be too shattered if faced with V's body. In the Sun and Devil endings, no matter what, Panam always leaves Night City with the Aldecaldos, and Sol is still alive. But the ending that hurts the most in regards to Panam is the Phantom Liberty one. V was in a coma for 2 years, and Panam tried to reach them, but understandably never got any word. Whether you romance her or not, when you try to call her and let her know you're alive, she refuses to speak to you. Panam can hold a grudge before the end of her quests, and she can certainly still hold one now. The biggest ouch of this whole ending is that Mitch is the one who calls V, to tell V that Panam does not want to talk to them and that they should not attempt to contact her again. So in conclusion, the star ending is definitely the best ending for V. And it's all because of love and family and vulnerability. You can't be strong without being a bit weak, and in the end, humans are stronger together. Otherwise, we never would have found our way around those campfires back when we lived in caves. There are no clean hands, but it's important how they become dirty. This is a line that sticks with me, one of Cyberpunk's best. It sounds like a cop-out from a man struggling to hold onto his identity, to hold his dignity together. But when you look deeper at who says it, the resolute Arasaka soldier Goro Takemura, this statement feels more like grim advice from one street kid to another. In a world devoid of morals, of loyalty, of even real bonds, Takemura is a man who devotes himself to such concepts, even if the subject of his dedication is the exact opposite of the man he strives to be. Welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we discuss how and why our favorite stories shape our own. Let's get into it. While we don't know exactly when Takemura was born, he was born in the slums of Chiba 11. This district boasted Cyberpunk Japan's highest murder rate, and Goro grew up impoverished. He grew up with his father, who worked in a kitchen. This sort of explains Goro being a bit of a foodie, and his grandmother. As a child, she would tell him stories of yokai, tales that stuck with him as the years went by. The young Takemura, along with droves of other children, knew they had next to no prospects in life, one of the few being conscription into Arasaka's military. Even in these early years, Goro almost symbolically sacrifices his well-being for Arasaka, as he would wash his clothes in the polluted waters of his district in order to appear cleaner, and thus more likely to be chosen by Arasaka. And eventually, this worked. In Goro's words, it was like winning the lottery. He went from being a street kid living among squalor to living in the comparable lap of luxury. He had food, shelter, clean clothes, clean water, access to education. Essentially, Goro's basic needs were decently met for the first time in his life. Takemura is a character who has immense loyalty to the Arasaka Corporation, but above all to Saburo Arasaka. I think that's an important distinction to make. Remembering where he comes from and how rough life was for him, potentially even rougher than Street Kid V, and realizing why things were that bad in the first place, just sort of exposes the twisted circumstances of this loyalty. The bar for his loyalty and dedication was not exactly high from the start, and that's not meant as a dig at Goro. It's sad when you remember that corporations like Arasaka are the reason why that bar was so low in the first place. Why places like Chiba 11 and Night City exist as they do. Goro had nothing because of Arasaka, and then suddenly, because of them, he had everything. Goro progressed through the military with top marks. We hear V remark with some fear in their voice at how capable Takemura is without his implants. And the fact that Saburo Arasaka actually handpicked him as his personal bodyguard says a lot about his skills. If you think about it, Atom Smasher and Oda are bodyguards of Yorinobu and Hanako, respectively. That Goro was chosen to protect the Emperor by the Emperor himself implies to me that Takemura, at full strength, with all of his implants and all of his upgrades, could absolutely take on these two himself. Even Smasher. He actually even trained Oda, and from our boss fight with Oda in 2077, we can see a lighter representation of Goro's own skills. It's kind of scary if you think of Oda and maybe crank up what Oda can do to maybe like a 10. Goro is intrinsically motivated by his own fierce dedication to the man who gave him everything, to the man who saw in him more than just the son of a kitchen worker, more than just some dirty kid from Chiba 11. And Takemura fought with every ounce of his strength because of this. He really looked up to Saburo Arasaka, almost like a father figure by the way he speaks of him. But the most screwed up part of this relationship is that Saburo knows the twisted basis on which his bodyguard's loyalty was born. I think of a dog master situation, not to, demean Goro, but with Goro sort of clueless to the circumstances of his dedication. The hand that feeds is also the hand that once ignored you until you had a use. Maybe deep down, there's even a fear on Goro's behalf of everything he has suddenly being taken away. Not even just materially, but even his purpose. And considering his background, you wouldn't want to go back to having nothing, being nothing, or fighting over scraps in the street. But at the end of the day, it's kind of left up to us to interpret the true depth of Goro's loyalty and whether it comes from fear or simply respect. It's hard to say. To quote Mad Men, one never knows how loyalty is born. By 2077, Takemura's been serving as Saburo Arasaka's bodyguard for some time. He has immeasurable power at his disposal, with top-of-the-line cybernetics and years of experience under his belt. Of course, that experience has been that of a loyal servant. That's all he really knows. Takemura accompanies the Emperor to Konpeki Tower so his boss can confront his son about stealing the relic. But mere seconds before he would have detected V and Jackie, he is sent away. Insofar as Takemura knows, Saburo was poisoned, and he's given every resource by Yorinobu in order to keep him distracted. And I say distracted because I think Takemura knew from the beginning how little Yorinobu's story made sense. And Yorinobu himself isn't dumb. He knew it was only a matter of time before Takemura, a man loyal to his father above all else, would overcome what sense of honor that bound him to his son, just because they shared a name, just judging from the look on his face when he first hears the story. Also, it makes sense that Yorinobu wouldn't have tried to, take out Takemura here because he still had all his implants at this time. He knows at this point that not even Adam Smasher is guaranteed to be able to take Takemura out, so yes, he sends Takemura out on a bit of a goose chase. Takemura hunts down Dex and uses him to hunt down V, the supposed killer he is determined to find. Takemura executes Dex point blank as he tries to bargain with him, and while this might be a bit of a frustrating moment for some players who wanted their own revenge on Dex, I think it shows immediately that Goro is a man on the opposite side of the board. He's not motivated by money or material wealth or anything like that. He kills Dex because he views it as his duty. Takemura is also operating on autopilot right now as he's failed in his duty to protect the man he was devoted to. A guy he spent his life idolizing. He's a weapon with a dead wielder at this point, and he's headed back to Yorinobu with V because that is his only purpose right now. But by now, Yorinobu realizes that his role in his father's death is about to be discovered. He sends a hit squad to take out V and Takemura, and the two are forced to fight together to survive. Likely before the two even arrive at Victor Vector's clinic, Arasaka did to Goro what they do to Corpo V in the Corpo intro. They disable his implants and cybernetics, leaving him at a grave disadvantage in these hellish streets. He is now an enemy to the corporation, a dog cast into a dog-eat-dog world. Takemura is sort of protective of V here. It's sweet, that he sticks around for a while V recovers and that he keeps tabs on them. But of course he does. It's not because he's a soft, gentle man, which, in certain contexts, I think he is. He does this because it's his duty to bring justice to his boss, and V is a key witness in that process. Goro is determined to carry out justice, to avenge Saburo, but his blunt approach to Night City leaves him stranded. He has to turn to V for help, something he's not given to very easily, but desperation and a desire for revenge does some things to people. Goro makes it very clear to V how much he hates Night City. There's no honor among thieves in Goro's book, and he's forced here to rely on one of Night City's most infamous. Goro despises the lies, the poison, the backwater nature of Night City. Its filth and desperation almost certainly remind him of where he came from, a place that he never wanted to return to. Most corpos worth their salt are fine with getting their hands dirty in a Night City-esque way, but Takemura is different. He's a soldier first. He's a simple guy. Not stupid, he's just a man who has lived by the whole, give me my orders and my resources and I will do this. The other thing too is that Takemura, as much as he may despise the falseness of Night City, like how fake even the food is, as he is a bit of a foodie, cannot recognize the eerie similarities to it that exist within the organization to whom he has devoted his life. He is loyal to a fault, to the point of blindness, and he never really loses that trait. To me, his is a tragic story for that reason. Honor is just a veneer for Arasaka, an entity that is, in practice, ruthlessly predatory. But it works on this street kid, raised from the bottom of Chiba 11. Because, if it doesn't, what would that make Goro Takemura? While their motives for working together were different, V looking to save themselves from the construct rewriting their head, and Takemura looking for vengeance, and feeling lost without that sense of duty, they're tied to the fact that Arasaka, as necessary as they were in creating their current problems, is just as necessary in solving them. For both these characters, and for countless others in the Cyberpunk universe, it begins and ends with a corporation. V does a lot of legwork that Takemura just can't, working their muscles as a solo in order to find their necessary leads. Rogue refuses to work with Takemura because of the target on his back. And also, Takemura doesn't really speak the solo language anyway. There's a sort of innocence about Takemura. It's really adorable, but it also shows how naive he can be with how the world actually works. He gets frustrated when the world doesn't operate by his same values and rules, but he doesn't try to change it. He knows that's pointless. He just seeks out someone who can handle it better. He later says, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I think that he's sort of resigned himself to this fact, that he can't adapt, because he feels like he's not capable of changing. He has to go back to where he was, and I feel bad that he's sort of limiting himself in that way. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Takemura, on the other hand, is a pro at reconnaissance and more militaristic plots, so he handles that half of the work these two are doing. V and Takemura end up working well together, with Takemura's more boomerish innocence pairing nicely with V's more harsh, street-smart quips. Throughout the missions they share, both characters expose to one another their differing worlds. The fullness of that story depends on what background you choose for your V, however. As a Corpo, you play as a V who had the opposite start in life to Goro. Corpo V is born into wealth and privilege, and is cast down simply as a side effect of being on the wrong Corpo's side. Both Takemura and V having this same experience is really interesting, but Takemura still remains loyal to Arasaka no matter what. With V, however, you get absorbed into the life of a solo on the streets. You are not entranced with your former employers, not even a little bit. As a nomad, sure, maybe there's not as much common ground between your V and Goro, but he actually expresses at one point that, on occasion, he wishes to become a nomad. He says then that it would mean escaping this world, but that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And to me, this just reveals that Takemura is far more self-aware than one might think. He isn't under an illusion that his life is perfect, or that he is someone to be admired. Because even he, with all his loyalties to Saburo Arasaka and his version of the Corp, recognizes the depressing cycle that he's stuck in. But at this point, he's spent how many decades there? His literal body is tied up with Arasaka. He's made his bed and he resolves to sleep in it, and he sounds so tired a lot of the time when we talk to him. It makes me sad because this feels like the sunk cost fallacy, and it's like, Goro, no, that doesn't have to be how it is. Let's just run away and be nomads together. Takemura also doesn't really like to retread his past all that much, and of course he clings to what few moral high grounds he still can, so he can have some peace at the end of the day. But even he says he still longs for the simple days of childhood. He started life severely disadvantaged, and I can only imagine the kind of person he would have chosen to be had he, the options that everybody deserves to have. The whole point of what he says here just says that, well, he may have never had a dream. I think he dreamed of being able to dream. It just makes me sad when you see older people who feel like they can't make any other choice in their life now. They're stuck, and it's like, no, don't think like that, don't. It's so sad. But my favorite background to have when it comes to Goro is a street kid V. You are the mirror of this top-of-the-line corpo soldier had he never been picked up by Arasaka. Or at least one type of mirror. Street Kid V never really left the streets. They killed their first person at 13, I believe. They've lived rough and have scratched at life for whatever it had to offer them. Their whole life has been survival on Night City's terms. Takemura was taken away from all the similar challenges of Chiba 11, but was introduced to a whole other world of them. A world that made him into the deadly weapon he is today, but on the opposite ideological side of V. Takemura challenges V's negative take on corporations, a take that all Vs, regardless of background, share, but feels most powerful, I think, when spoken of by a street kid V. They grew up under the thumb of corporate oppression, right at its heart. This V sees the suffering that results from such dominion every day and has for their whole life, and they fight like a dog because of it. Night City is, for most who live there, a hole that just keeps getting deeper, with the corporations holding the shovel. To V, working for a corp is like selling one's soul. Takemura calls out V for looking down on him for who he served. To him, V trivializes the struggles Takemura's lived through to get where he is. But in the same breath, by saying that V took the easy path, kinda trivializes V's too. It wasn't easy for V either growing up in the streets. And it wasn't easy being a solo. Just as I'm sure it wasn't easy growing up in the Arasaka military and being bodyguard to the world's most powerful man. Goro argues that V isn't properly recognizing the value of corporate order, the potential stability, the offered solutions that they could present to who knows what problem of life, instead of all this chaos. But mostly, he criticizes the fact that V, and people who tend to hate corporations, offer no real sustainable alternative to such a life. But from V's perspective, there's nothing sustainable about corporate domination. They point out the mess that is Night City, a place Takemura hates but is imprisoned in for as long as he is stuck in this fog of hatred and regret. To Takemura, using Night City as the be-all, end-all dismisses the stability given to, say, all the people who live comfortably because of Arasaka's employment. To V, if corporations were really all that, they would have helped hard-run places like Chiba 11, had they really cared. All Takemura says at the end of this point is that they cannot fix everything all at once. Which, sure, but I can't help but wonder if that's just something Saburo Arasaka told him, or if that's what Arasaka brainwashed into him while he was in school. Or it could truly just be as simple as Takemura trying to soothe himself and maybe his own quiet doubts about the work that he does and the people he works for. And there's no way he hasn't noticed some of the hypocrisy in his own philosophy. But I guess it's just easier to come up with excuses so that you don't have to face the ugly truth about yourself and your beliefs and how they don't exactly channel the way that you'd probably like to think they do in real life, and that's a difficult thing to face for anybody, I think. Takemura sort of serves almost like an anti-Johnny Silverhand a bit. His opinions are the opposite of the extremist, anti-corporate guy that we know and love having stuck in our head. They're both very set in their ways and opinions, and it is very difficult for V to have even the slightest bit of change, but it does come through a friendship with both of these characters. But it's like, you can't really be friends with Johnny and Takemura at the same time. You're almost forced to choose, like, who are you more friends with? These people are so similar in how they operate, but their opinions are just, like, on opposite sides of the board. And Johnny does not like Takemura at all. He always says that. He's always... If they could talk to each other, I'm sure it would be, like, a never-ending, like, spat between the two of them, which it would be kind of funny, but I'll definitely touch more on the subject of Johnny and Takemura in Johnny's video, because I think it is a very interesting sort of comparison between these two. This whole conversation, to me, shows unstoppable force meets immovable object. V and Takemura are matching one another's energy here. They both have separate experiences in life that share a lot of similarities, but they've both shaped how V and Takemura see the world in opposing ways. Neither are totally wrong here with the things they say, but they're both a bit defensive about their life stories. Neither are really going into this discussion with an open mind. Well, depending, of course, on what dialogue choices you make as V, I suppose. V has seen corporations at their relative worst, whereas Takemura has seen them at their relative best until very recently. These are two extremes who struggle to meet in the middle based on their own differing experiences. Although V and Takemura don't really change one another, the extent of that change being dependent on player perspective and choice, they find balance in the fact that they are two people who lost someone very important to them in Konpeki Tower. They're both grieving, and they're both not at peace with this loss. Takemura is the one who points this out, how neither of them are in a very good headspace, and so they're doing what they're doing, seeking conflict, causing chaos. They're diving into hell because, as Takemura says, it is the duty of the living to atone for the dead. And that line says a lot of things. For one thing, depending on how you view V, maybe V is doing all this with Jackie's memory in their mind, but then you're also forced to ask yourself how much of what V is doing is because of Johnny rewriting their brain. But when it comes to Goro, these words almost serve like the bars of his ideological prison, a prison that he has given up escaping from. In some ways, I think the person Takemura lost goes beyond just losing Saburo Arasaka. I think he lost a part of himself and the image of the man he fought so hard to be in that tower. I love Takemura's quote, "There are no clean hands, but it's important how they become dirty." That is why I started the video with this quote. I love it. And now I'm going to talk about it. Takemura has likely killed a lot of people in his life. He's defended the world's most powerful man for who knows how many decades, and no doubt from some people who wanted revenge and justice for Arasaka's brutal tactics. Being with the Emperor as much as he has, and being a part of Arasaka for so long, Goro would be aware of the more horrible things the company does to maintain and gain power. But the difference in his mind that makes him no common street thug stealing and murdering, or protecting the boss of his gang, is his idea that what Arasaka does is a necessary evil, outweighed by the good. Takemura tells V that he was chosen out of 100 other candidates by Saburo Arasaka himself. Goro describes his former boss as someone who could make the right decisions with imperfect knowledge. He trusted the Emperor wholeheartedly. He had to, really, for two reasons. Number one, his time in Arasaka military school and his education coming from Arasaka likely drilled into his head a degree of brainwashing about the corporation. But also, how could you defend someone with your life if you didn't believe in them? He had to. Depending on who you are in the Cyberpunk universe, Goro was either defending the world's greatest visionary or its worst tyrant. Which do you think is easier for him to stomach? Goro has done bad things for a bad man, or he's done necessary things for a great man. One of these framings would, for most people with a heart, eat away at them very quickly. The other would at least help them to sleep at night. And just based on all the little moments we see with Goro, how he's a foodie, how polite he is, which you could argue is a part of his culture, but you can feel the genuine emotion in him when he apologizes or pays respect to Wakako, how innocent he is in texts and understanding the world, how he rejects V's advances by saying he has other obligations in Japan, how as your friendship with him progresses, he takes V's side and protects V from Hellman's bullshit. It shows that he's not just some bloodthirsty piece of garbage. Also the fact that he sends you the picture of the cat. It's just very sweet. Goro Takemura is a man who feels very deeply and simply, and you can feel that in every ending that he has. The fact that he actually takes the time to remind you of what he told you about the Bakeneko, and also how he remembers with fondness his grandma's stories. He's a sensitive, gentle man beneath all the harshness that he's been forced to live through and take on. But the sad thing is that he was born into a world that couldn't care less. After Hanako's kidnapping, and V hopefully saving Takemura's life, you may very well never see him again, depending on your choice of ending, that is. You could argue that all endings to Takemura's story end not so great for him, which really sucks, but it makes a lot of narrative sense just based on how he thinks of himself. In any ending V takes that doesn't involve siding with Hanako, it's implied he commits suicide. He speaks of the death poems of past samurai, but gives up on writing his own, and instead calls V to tell them to burn in hell. In the Phantom Liberty ending, however, Hanako is killed during a failed takeover attempt of Arasaka, and he is framed for her murder. He's been on the run for 2 years by the time V returns to Night City, and in the end credits, Takemura curses V, cast down into the gutter of a city all too much like the one he fought so hard to escape. But in the Devil ending, we see another side of Takemura. Takemura is loyal to Hanako, not for her own sake, but because she represents ideals that line up with her father's. Not only that, she seeks to put Saburo Arasaka back in power by putting his engram in Yorinobu's body. Takemura gets a second chance, sort of, to protect his charge. Takemura will help V through these missions. He dismisses Hellman's complaints and concerns, trusting V wholeheartedly and having V's back. This generosity and goodness of spirit he has isn't a strange thing by this point. Takemura actually, for instance, begs V to show mercy to his former pupil, Oda, when you fight him during the parade missions. Takemura also doesn't expect V to come back and save their life. He actually gets a little mad at them for coming back. He's like, "Why would you come back and die here? Go!" Takemura wears a white suit throughout most of these endgame missions, and you can see this as symbolic of a number of things. White, in Japanese culture, can represent purity, and in Buddhism, it can represent death. White was often worn during the samurai practice of seppuku. I get the vibe Takemura is determined to see this job through or die trying. Those are his two options, at least in his mind. But even despite all this, Takemura doesn't really get a second chance. He is not really rewarded for his loyalty, aside from being able to go home and live comfortably. He is reassigned by Hanako, no longer the Emperor's bodyguard. V can ask him later when they're on the space station and he comes to visit V, if he feels justice was appropriately served, having Saburo's consciousness implanted in the body of his son, his killer. And you get the vibe that, for Takemura, it's a really uncomfortable situation for him to stomach. For one thing, he had no idea about Saburo's engram. I think Takemura thought he had more of the Emperor's trust than he did. And I think it did kind of sting him a little that this was hidden from him. Not in a way that he had expectations, but just in the way that he realized maybe he didn't really know this man as much as he thought. And also, in a way, there being an engram kind of made protecting him a bit obsolete. Goro being this bodyguard is almost like his job was just a distraction by the fact that the Emperor could simply be implanted in another body once his old one died. Was it really all that, protecting the old feeble body of the Emperor? Maybe for a while, but at the end... And also, Takemura refuses to accompany you when you go to confront Yorinobu. Hanako ordered no harm to come to her brother, but Takemura knows that he would just kill him as a form of revenge, and he holds himself back. Perhaps that is why he's still being kept away from Yorinobu's body. Like, really, how could he protect the body of a man who killed the person he swore to die in defense of? Where he believed in Saburo Arasaka before, it's definitely not the same level of belief that he has now. Anyway, the whole reason why Takemura comes to the space station in the devil ending is to tell V that they're still dying. And it's an important moment when V actually tells Takemura that Takemura let V down. V basically explains that I did all of this, all these quests. I followed this ending because you told me, you assured me that Arasaka could fix me. And then nothing of the sort is happening. Nothing has changed. And you can see that this does hurt Takemura. He realizes that he's really let down this person who trusted him and was loyal to him. V can agree to Takemura's offer of having their consciousness copied so that they can live on as an engram. An eternal servant to Arasaka, in a way. And in a roundabout way, I feel like Goro has to realize this, especially considering how he says to V when V explains that they think that Arasaka is out to just, imprison them with the engram bit. Goro says you overstate your importance. And I think it's the same when it comes to him, too. He isn't that important to Arasaka. I think he struggles to come to terms with this. It almost makes sense that Takemura was the one sent to relay this news in the ending that he is alive in. It's like, if anybody can convince V to do this really twisted thing, it's gonna be him. And the sad thing is, Arasaka and Hanako and whoever can tell Takemura that this is a really good decision and he'd just go with it because he's so involved at this point. It is devilish to send a man who is still struggling to come to terms with his own lack of importance and value to a company he's devoted his life to tell somebody else that message under the impression that they're giving them a really good option. It's like he's got it's like there's a barrier in his head, and I feel like he knows it's there, but he just can't face it. It's too hard. Or, if you don't want to do the engram bit, you can just leave and go back to Earth to live out the rest of your days. Takemura is happy if you choose the first option, and promises to show V some real food and to hang out. But should you refuse, he's left looking quite sad and distraught. V can say in this ending that as good a person as Takemura is, he will never understand freedom. And V isn't wrong. Takemura is stuck in a prison of Arasaka's making, but also of his own, with his own beliefs that he can't change. V leaves him to consider this, and I feel like they probably never meet again. This ending makes me so sad, because you can see that Takemura, in the devil ending, has recognized what loyalty and trust actually are. That it's a bond that should be both ways. Takemura lived for so long not realizing that to the people he served, to the people he was so dedicated to, he was nothing but a sharp weapon, a tool. He was disposable in the end, even if he is treated well. While the one person who did show him loyalty and trust in return is unintentionally let down by him. Takemura did everything he did to prove himself to people who only saw in him a use. Meanwhile, he let down the one person who did come to look at him as a friend, a trusted friend. No endings are really great for Takemura, aside from being able to go home to Japan, but you can tell he's dealing with some rough emotions and realizations. I wish so much we could have romanced Goro and ran off with him in the Nomad ending, with Nibbles the cat. As Goro says, everybody gets their hands dirty eventually, but how you do so, that's what's important. Yes, I'm saying the quote again. Well, in every ending but the devil ending, he hates that he has seemingly lost that quote-unquote noble how. It's been taken from him by V, by the disorder of the world around him that he thinks needs corporate order. But ironically enough, in the one ending where he returns to this original how, he realizes the truth. Maybe not on the surface, maybe he will briefly realize it and bury it back down, but the truth has made itself known to him, I think. The pain on his face when V and him break up their friendship is enough evidence for me to believe that he knows. And maybe the next time Takemura sits down to have some real food, as he hoped to share with V someday, he'll remember the friend who showed him what real loyalty and trust were. Who doesn't love the story of a rebel, or an underdog, even a dangerous girl? I think most of us do, which is why it's a shame that we didn't get to see more than one single scene involving Michiko Arasaka in Cyberpunk 2077, the only known grandchild of Saburo Arasaka and one of the family's most fascinating characters. And yes, the ex of Adam Smasher. But believe it or not, that's the least interesting thing about her. And today, we will be taking a deep dive into some cyberpunk tabletop lore to really get to know this clever and remarkable character. Hello, and welcome to Shaped by Stories, where we discuss how and why our favorite stories shape our own. Let's get into it. Michiko was born in Night City in the late 2000s, to Kei Arasaka and an unnamed American mother. Knowledge of her existence was on a need-to-know basis, both due to Kei's own father's expected misgivings with a half-American grandchild, as well as to keep Michiko safe from Kei's enemies. While Michiko was kept in the dark about much of the doings and goings-on of Arasaka, her father was the CEO of that very company. He knew that a target would be on his daughter's back the moment someone discovered her, and he didn't want her to be used against him. In a way, Michiko isn't unlike her aunt, Hanako, in the matter of her upbringing. Both women were cloistered away from a young age, very precious to their respective fathers. But her father spent most of his time away from her. But this didn't mean Michiko lacked for a father figure. Kei Arasaka employed one of Arasaka's top solos as his daughter's bodyguard, Kenichi Zaburo. And if you think Adam Smasher is frightening, apparently Kenichi is on another level. He's considered the only person who could stand toe-to-toe with Morgan Blackhand and potentially exceed him in power. Nobody was gonna touch Michiko under his watch, and he continued to watch over her well into her adulthood, long after the death of Kei Arasaka in 2023, in the midst of the Fourth Corporate War. With her father gone, Michiko started to learn more about Arasaka's dark side, though she still remained mostly out of the loop in the United States. Despite technically being an Arasaka, she was on the outside of the family. Michiko grew up American, like her mother, and this was the only culture she really knew. It was almost certainly a challenge for her to try and reconcile the countless people who hated her for what her family name was, but also the fact that she knew next to nothing about what went on in the company for most of her life up until that point. The war came to an end in 2025, and Arasaka was blamed for much of its atrocities. The NUSA president at this time, Elizabeth Kress, was a former Militech CEO, and she took advantage of this national outrage to oust their primary competitor from the country on a legal level. Michiko, 17 at this time, and despite her American citizenship, was about to be deported. But Michiko was unwilling to leave the only land she'd ever known for Japan. While Michiko was sheltered growing up, she wasn't a complete secret from the public at this point. She actually had a following and thousands of fans. Utilizing that fame, her intelligence, and her good looks, she gained enough star power to meet with President Kress. And miraculously, this meeting was sort of a success. Not so much for Arasaka, but for Michiko. Much of what was said in this meeting was kept secret, the public believing that Michiko had simply apologized on behalf of her family, with enough charm and sincerity to gain the sympathy of the president. This is why she was then allowed to stay and finish her schooling on American soil. But the reality of that discussion is quite different. President Kress struck a deal with young Michiko Arasaka. In exchange for her continued citizenship, she was expected to help dismantle and eliminate any Arasaka operations in the country. Michiko eventually graduated high school and was accepted into Stanford, where she studied criminology. And this is an important thing to note for what I'm about to say, and also for the next section after this one, but in a session of Cyberpunk 2020, led by Mike Pondsmith, Michiko Arasaka goes on a bender on her 18th birthday with her bodyguard, Kenichi Zaburo. Some shit happens, as tends to happen in tabletop games. It is not a proper game if there's no shenanigans. Well, in the events of this session, dubbed by Mike Pondsmith Michiko's Night Out, she more or less gets it on with Adam Smasher, or at least just briefly dates him. Adam smashes her. Also, another thing too, Mike Pondsmith says that Adam Smasher has a cyborg body he uses when he's not smashing in his standard way that looks just like a young blonde Elvis. In fact, apparently he has multiple bodies, but this one in particular was the one featured in Michiko's Night Out. And of course, Adam Smasher was as gentlemanly as he could possibly be with Michiko. She is his boss's granddaughter after all. I heard another rumor, I don't know if this is true or not, that apparently Mike Pondsmith or somebody wanted to run a sequel session to this where Michiko has to figure out how she's gonna break up with Adam Smasher, and I'm like, oh my god. A lot of people actually think it's Hanako who dated Adam Smasher, but no, it was actually Michiko. It's hilarious because with Michiko and Adam Smasher, you're kind of just left to wonder, isn't he a psychopath? And isn't she a criminologist? But then you stop and think, is that why they hooked up? Like, maybe Michiko's actually quite screwed up herself in the Dexter sort of way. Not Dexter Deshawn, like Dexter the show. And that's why she chose the field she chose. I'm wondering a lot of things. And apparently Gemini suits can come with the Mr. Stud, so it's not technically canon at this moment. It's sort of in canon limbo. From what I've read, they're sort of trying to work it into the timeline. I hope it is canon. Like, I guess it does take a crazy messed up person to know a crazy messed up person like that, kinda? And based on what she actually ends up doing throughout her story that is canon, her getting with Smasher definitely checks out. She's definitely a character who marches to the beat of her own drum, and I absolutely love that. Also, last thing, Mike Pondsmith describes Michiko as Battle Angel Alita crossed with a Mad Girl Genius, which, you know, we could totally just end the video on that descriptor because it is pretty, yeah, like, but her story is too interesting, so we're gonna keep going. After graduating Stanford, Michiko's life became quite packed, specifically throughout the 2030s. First of all, she started her own private investigation and security company called Danger Girl in Night City. And Danger Girl is so awesome, and we were robbed of it in 2077. The aesthetic, the look, the vibe. I'm mad. The logo is so cute. Like, look at it. It looks so innocent, but like any cat, it would claw your eyes out. Kind of like Michiko in a way, who was known to weaponize, especially as the CEO of Danger Girl, an outward persona of naivete and cuteness and semi-ditziness to mask the clever CEO within. The operatives of Danger Girl, like the Puma Squad, wear tactical armor with tactical armor cat ears. Their look is very kitsch and aesthetic, sort of like the Mox, but with heavier armor. There's also this ad for the company that says, "Little detective, big gun. The bad guys never see us coming," and I love it. Some people in-universe would scoff at Danger Girl for this motto and presentation, but with Michiko's remarkable intellect, charisma, and growing mastery of criminology, she catapulted her company to the heights of success. She was always in the top circles wherever she traveled, attending the most exclusive parties and rubbing elbows with the rich and famous and powerful. The people who could afford the top of industry work that Danger Girl offered. And Danger Girl had quite the rep before long. No matter the gig, they did their work with the utmost effectiveness, and Michiko even got a seat on the Night City Council due to her company's success. Like, yes, Michiko was born into wealth and privilege as an Arasaka, but she was on the outside. She was the underdog. I doubt her grandfather really helped her out with this. She managed to finesse the NUSA president, she managed to stick around in the States, and she managed to start her own company and skyrocket it. Yeah, sure, she's chaotic, but you can't knock this girl's accomplishments. Michiko actually met her husband, Mark Sanderson, while working a, quote, particularly exciting case with him for Danger Girl. And, given her potential history with Adam Smasher and her general chaotic vibe, I'm just define particularly exciting. I want to know. And also, what Mark is like, because we don't know much about Mark, but Michiko did take his surname, and up to 2077, insofar as we know, she's still known as Michiko Sanderson. She's still with good old Mark. As Michiko grew older, she still weaponized her persona of naivete and sort of cuteness, but she grew into it more maturely. The way she's described is almost like a femme fatale kind of deal. She can turn on and off that persona like a switch, and she can actually be very scary when she's serious. But by the sounds of it, she does genuinely enjoy the work that she does. However, the one main thing about Danger Girl is that all the PI stuff, all the security stuff, was just a front, even if it was one that the company was really dedicated to and took very seriously. Danger Girl, in reality, served as an anti-Arasaka operation, using money funneled from President Kress, as well as from their successful business ventures. Michiko was able to neutralize countless Arasaka operations nationwide. She was making good on her promise to President Kress. But another important thing occurred around this time too, just before the start of Danger Girl. Arasaka began to fracture into 3 different factions, with the Taka radicalists grouping under Yorinobu, the Kiji traditionalists falling under Hanako's banner, and, lastly, the Hato faction, asking for Michiko to be their head. At the time, Michiko wasn't as into this at first, as she wasn't really involved in Arasaka on both professional and familial level. But Hato, although the smallest faction of the 3, was the one faction that wanted to see some really dramatic reforms in Arasaka's business model. They were the progressive faction, or as progressive as Arasaka could be. Even if Michiko didn't really care much about this, at the very least, it surely did give her a bit of an ear to the ground when it came to her family's activities in NUSA territory. So, to explain this next part of Michiko's story, I have to take us all back We're rewinding to August 20th, 2023. Yes, that very night that Johnny Silverhand nuked Arasaka Tower, and that's not actually exactly what happened. Johnny's memories, as we see in 2077, are very different when compared to the more trustworthy accounts of the same events that you can find in the tabletop. And if you look at the lore version of the fall of Arasaka Tower, Johnny isn't even the guy who planted the bomb. That actually wasn't even his job. And what he did at the tower in lore is very different from what we see through his engram. Even Alt in 2077 remarks at how unreliable Johnny's memories are. The nuking of Arasaka Tower was actually a Militech plot involving multiple strike teams, where rather than Johnny being the head of this operation, his team was actually just supposed to be a distraction. The real tactical nuclear device, supplied by Militech, was not, insofar as I can find, even involved with Johnny. That was supposed to be someone else's job, someone on Strike Team Beta, not Johnny's Strike Team Alpha. I mean, maybe Johnny did sneak his own bomb in, and that's the bomb that ended up going off, but the accounts are conflicting here. The idea was to set off the tactical nuke in an underground bunker section that held Soul Killer, destroying it, but containing much of the damage to that small area. But something went wrong, and the Militech nuke went off on the 120th floor. Lots of people died. Many were injured. Lots of destruction. It was a mess. The blast actually caused sunrises and sunsets to glow an ominous red for many years after this event, this period becoming known as the Time of the Red. I'm actually reminded of that sunset that we see throughout the bar windows at the Atlantis when it's red, but that flashback is supposed to take place before the big explosion that was supposed to make the sunsets and sunrises red, so that's why I'm like, Johnny, how much of this is accurate? Like, I have many questions. Anyway, President Crest knew she had to do the old damage control. If people found out it was a Militech explosive that blew up the building, that wouldn't be good for business or politics in the NUSA. So yeah, she blamed Arasaka for the blast, saying they blew themselves up to stop Militech from taking the tower. Who knows, maybe Arasaka did set off the bomb, ultimately. The actual events on that floor at that moment are a mystery. But there is some truth to Arasaka having their own explosives in the tower, and Arasaka's thermonuclear device was even more powerful than the one employed by Militech that night. It was actually in the tower, below it, during that very assault. In previous timelines of Cyberpunk, this is the nuke that went off, but now, in the updated Cyberpunk Red timeline, where you can read more about all the events I'm discussing, it did not go off. Arasaka eventually tried to find that bomb in the ruins, curious about whose explosive actually went off, but they were beat by a certain Samantha Stevens, a fan of Johnny Silverhand. She was able to lug the bomb out of the ruins, as well as Johnny's body. She actually then proceeded to dump the bomb in Del Coronado Bay and put Johnny's body in its casing. Now, this is where Michiko comes in. Sometime in the 2040s, Michiko caught wind of some edgerunners who located the bomb. Specifically, its casing. The actual bomb was not in the case, but by the sounds of it, they didn't realize that. Michiko stopped them as they were transporting it to New Mexico, explaining what was in the case and explaining her own sense of guilt in what occurred that one night in Arasaka Tower. In this instance, she actually drops her cutesy exterior when they give her the trigger codes, and she's dead serious about making sure that bomb does not go off. She helps out the Solos in delivering it to where it needs to go, when she's sure they don't want to blow it up either, or so she says, and then leaves them be. And I'll admit, this last part, especially if the crate actually contains Johnny's body, which apparently was confirmed by Mike Pondsmith, that basically says that, number one, Johnny's body is not in the oil fields. That was a lie. His body was taken to the Los Alamos labs in New Mexico, and after that, we don't know. And also, according to Mike Pondsmith, somebody else in universe has that bomb. But we will not know until that veil of mystery is lifted. All of this leads me to question, did Michiko know that that was not the bomb in the case? Did she know it was Johnny's body? I definitely think she knew, but she was going along with the idea of it being a bomb. Maybe once she got the trigger codes, she just escorted them to the Los Alamos labs to make sure that they didn't discover that, yeah, there's no bomb in there, and that they'd given the codes to somebody else who maybe does know where the actual bomb is. Michiko is chaotic and very well informed in her own right, and I'm kind of wondering, does she have the bomb? Let me know what you think about that in the comments below, especially tabletop players, because I'm sure you guys are far better theorists about this than I am. But she was definitely up to something, and I especially think she's up to something when you consider her later reverse role on Arasaka's board of directors. Sometime following 2045, Michiko got more involved with the Hato faction, and even joined Arasaka's board of directors. We don't know exactly how or why Michiko became involved with her family, but at this point, the NUSA has a new president, and Night City isn't exactly under NUSA jurisdiction anymore. I don't think Rosalind Myers can use deportation as a threat towards Michiko. We don't know exactly where that deal stands. Maybe Michiko finding the bomb casing and maybe knowing where the bomb is led to her concluding that it was a Militech explosive that destroyed the towers that day. Maybe she's been using that info to twist things around with her deal with the president. Or maybe she's working with Rosalind Myers and playing Arasaka in favor of Militech? One thought that I've had is that if Michiko really is working with Militech still, and we've all probably heard the theories about Militech being the organization that supported the heist that would lead to the Emperor's death, the heist that involved the Flathead, T-Bug having that Militech training sim, Oleg Darkovich probably being an NUSA agent. Maybe Michiko is sort of in on the heist in a way, and I realize that is a theory that requires a lot more exploration, but I think it's very possible. I do see Michiko as being far more of a capable manipulator than Yorinobu is. As smart as Yorinobu is, I feel like Michiko could run circles around him somehow, and I'm like, I have to explore this idea. I really wish we knew more about what happened between the events of 2045 and 2077 that led to Michiko getting in with her family, because it's kind of a crazy jump. Michiko going from working against her family to then being on the board of the family company that she was working against. There's a lot that could have happened in that gap of time, and I would love to someday know more. Michiko has next to no role in the actual events of Cyberpunk 2077. Maybe Danger Girl is referenced on a shard somewhere, but we can't work with them or find their headquarters insofar as I know. V can meet and save Michiko's life in the Devil ending when we go with Hanako to facilitate a scolding of the board by Saburo Arasaka's engram. Michiko is at first reluctant to believe that her uncle is a traitor, at least openly, but she does eventually go along with her grandfather's orders. And this part is really interesting, considering how Kei always feared Saburo would despise his half-American grandchild. I want to know what happened that led to Michiko getting a seat on the board of his company. Like, how did that relationship get to that level? Was it just pure nepotism? Maybe Michiko is sort of like Yorinobu. She's certainly an individualistic character, and she's done some radical things herself. Maybe she was willingly siding with Yorinobu and willing to look the other way while he caused his chaos. But once her grandfather's engram appeared, she gave up the jig and just went along with the winning side so she could live to fight another day. The Hato faction is one of reform, and maybe she'll take a different approach to change. But who knows? She doesn't seem to die in any of the endings. maybe she'll feature heavily in the next Cyberpunk game. While Michiko barely appears in 2077, which is a damn shame, she's the most interesting Arasaka, just based on the sheer variety of her resume. Like PI, Corpo Princess, Atom Smasher's ex, criminologist, CEO. If you cheat on me, you're cheating on my dad, Arasaka's most deadly cyber ninja. Like, what the hell? Her bodyguard is stronger than Atom Smasher if you look at the lore. She and her story is so cool. And I wish that there was more of her in 2077. But also, I have to note, she looks just like Lizzie Wizzy, and I know that they probably just reused assets, but like when you look at this, like, somebody on Reddit did like a comparison, and it's pretty bang on. I'm sort of disappointed by her final design. I mean, yes, styles change as you get older, but her design in red and all the art that goes with it, 10 out of 10, I love it. Kinda wish they'd stuck with it. It would have stood out a lot when you stand her next to Hanako. Also, her wearing black while Takemura and Hanako are in white, that would be really cool too. Could show her different values and motivations even in a symbolic level, but oh well. Night City, the city of dreams. Here is where all your wildest desires can be satiated. Here, you can rise from the seedy underbelly all the way to its glittering top. Morals hold no power here. Selflessness and authenticity are pure fiction. Greed and lust are not aspects of ourselves to keep in check. Rather, they are encouraged. The potential for wrath is slipped on each day like a pair of shoes, of which each person can stomp upon the world with them. And at the end of the day, kick off all that responsibility, because what is guilt in a city where everyone partakes in the excess of human darkness? Like a dream, Night City displays the highest highs and the lowest lows, often in immediate, stunning succession. Grand aspirations and horrible despair are the lifeblood that runs between the bones of its towers. To the unwary, Night City's setting can serve as its greatest allure. Its gleaming skyscrapers and neon hues fool the dreamer into having their eyes only on the prize. Like in dreams where our waking mind can notice obvious, bizarre details, all while the dreaming mind simply brushes them aside. Because there is a promise in the heights of Night City architecture, one that creates an almost willful ignorance in the people who live there. Buildings and crosswalks and even the night sky are plastered with reminders of how you too can be so much more if only you give more. Give more of everything you have. Give more of yourself. Height represents power, excess, and beauty is divine. Each untarnished bit of metal, each smooth layer of paint hides the decay beneath Night City's surface. Beneath those corporate peaks thumps a heart of squalor. If the upper echelons of Night City serve as the handsome grin, then the outnumbering slums serve as its bones. We see it, plain as day, as we adventure through the streets of Night City. The rubbish, the people rolling around between dumpsters, the gunshots in the next alley over, all while people just walk right on by. The disparity in Night City between the rich and the poor is massive, though the apathy that comes with overexposure to this renders it almost dreamlike. Through gameplay and how normal the existence of suffering and injustice in the cyberpunk world is, you also get so used to it yourself. It becomes barely noticeable. It's just something on the street. The way you begin to walk past these sights is almost dreamlike. You note it, but that's it. it's not all that different from the world we live in today. The day may shine a light on the more bizarre sides of Night City, but by night, the despair and stagnation is all the more obvious, even with the neon lights flickering everywhere you look. Their glow can't hide the rot. Almost like a nightmare, Night City's layout begins to feel like a maze, where one wrong turn in an alleyway can get you lost for good. The only map most people have is to run from the sound of gunfire, but even then, whenever you turn your back in this place, you can always feel the hair standing up on the back of your neck. Night City's very body is stressful, but to the people living there, trapped there, they have no choice, at least in their minds, and oftentimes in their pockets, but to endure it. The top of Arasaka Tower has lured many to their demise. Countless dreamers have nearly reached the top, only to be buried deeper than ever before, beneath the weight of their ambitions. And the system is all built to enable it. A system built on deception, on the ladder of chaos. To quote a certain character who was destroyed by a certain show that I can't get into that right now. It's a system that takes away the need to maintain a full facade. After all, the key players of this game are already at the top anyway. All they care about is simply staying there. And so they tell their obvious lies and spread their obvious illusions. But people, again, still fall for it. Night City, regardless of what its founder, Richard Knight, intended, is built on a fairy tale. The American dream has become the American lie, archaic and outdated, something that I think many people who play this game can sympathize with. All humans have dreams. They all have ambitions. We daydream about them and yearn for things we perceive beyond our reach. Night City's draw is the idea of its quick fix, and though we recognize it's illogical, as we do in dreams where we know something doesn't make any sense, we still go along with it, almost helpless in the face of our dreamy desires. Our baser nature tethers us even tighter to delusion, until we choke on it. Too good to be true is countered by the classic, but I'm not like everybody else. And a lot of the time, after this poison begins to take hold, things seem picturesque. A few small successes bring on the rose-tinted glasses. The ease of indulgence and excess in Night City is enough to get someone drunk on the illusion that Night City's pros far outweigh its cons. As humans, we are nothing if not easily led astray by what is brightly and colorfully displayed right in front of us. And then the jaws close. Beneath the marketing and the finery and the reliance on human delusion is a corrupt system run by those seeking to hold on to power, and those seeking to gain it. Power is gained in Night City by the subjugation of the weak, and the creation of the weak is by design. The whole system of Night City and the cyberpunk world is vampiric. Night City will take from a person every last eddy, every last bit of hope, and convince a person that all of it is their own fault. This illusion is what maintains its power, and the power of those who almost serve the system like a minion, while telling themselves that they're special. Around and around and around they go, be it gangs or corpos, or politicians and solos, chasing each other around until someone screws up. And the only people who last long enough to see success in Night City are the ones that recognize that this place can't be beaten at its own game. Jackie Wells, T-Bug, Dexter Deshawn, Evelyn Parker, and Johnny Silverhand. These are just a few examples of an epidemic of people who believed that they could somehow beat Night City, without realizing that they were all already beaten from the start. One day, someone's on the cusp of glory, and the next, they're crawling out of a garbage heap. Nobody, regardless of status, is immune to this fate. In the blink of an eye, everything can change. One moment, you're dreaming of Greece, and the next, your brain is scrambled like an egg. Or you go from a rich life of indulgence and luxury to a paranoid existence in the back of some cheap motel. Maybe you had dreams of being a beautiful starlet, only to be broken and discarded like trash by people who once thought you were the next big thing. Life in this dream world is unpredictable, except only in its habit of going badly for those who try to fly too high. Those who think they can outsmart and outplay the very soul of the game they're playing quickly learn it doesn't take kindly to hubris. Its wrath is slow and steady and almost always poetic, but even then, there will always be droves of people who never learn from these stories. To everybody who has ever dreamed, they are the protagonist of their own tale. Surely they're different. The only people who do survive are those who somehow, be it through their own strength of will or a sheer stroke of luck, wake up from this dreamscape. For people who see the world around them for what it truly is, there's a chance at escape. Leaving their dreams behind and escaping the nightmare is the only thing that can save a person from themselves. Whether those dreams were simply revising the ways of this hellhole in a quest of misguided justice, or in pursuit of what it was said to sell. Dreams are interesting in the sense that they're almost always focused on conflict, not necessarily sensical conflict. The problem structure is an observation as remarkable as it is simple, that fiction, across all human cultures and all mediums, always naturally gravitates to the same conflict-centric structure. While other artists have tried to break this structure in the interest of, quote-unquote, graduating written art to its next level, it's never really worked out all that well. Human art thrives around conflict, in the same way our minds focus on conflict. Conflict and overcoming trials is etched into us. Aside from stunning environmental design, I think that Night City's ever-present sensation of conflict is what really draws people into its world. We can't help but be engaged. We almost have to be. If we're not, we will probably die. Even if we're not the ones involved in any of these encounters that we observe around the city, we still can't help but be interested. It's just built into us. Some believe that fiction was the first simulator, the first way of practicing out situations before they happened, to better ensure our survival and self-control under stressful situations. But why are dreams like this, and why do we even dream at all? If you go back to Freudian theory, you get the whole dreams are a reflection of something in our subconscious trying to tell us blah blah blah. But another theory presents the likely possibility that dreams themselves are much like stories, also trying to help us prepare for events we may face in our next day, even if our implicit self isn't all that good at throwing together a realistic narrative. Even in a 1959 study run by a scientist called Michel Jouvet, he observed that cats, after strategic damage of their brainstems, would act out their dreams. Almost always the behavior demonstrated, in evolutionary psychologist Jonathan Gottschall's words, kitty hell. They would pounce, run around, hiss, and stalk. Rarely would they purr, Rarely were they relaxed or content, and they would act out all the issues of cat life, all the difficulties they could face in their day-to-day. It's fitting for many reasons that cats feature as much as they do in Cyberpunk 2077, but I can't help but look at Nibbles and the stories of the Bakaneko a little differently. Perhaps these cats only hold on to life in a place like Night City because of their repeated training sessions in nightmares. And this isn't just an isolated incident in cats and other animals. People with neurodegenerative diseases, where the part of the brainstem that limits motor function in sleep is damaged, also act out their dreams. And almost always, these dreams lead to the dreamer showing behaviors of terror and even downright aggression. In some instances, these people would hurt their spouses in their sleep. Without the influence of the explicit mind, dreams almost expose to us, when we remember them, the animal side of human nature. Desire, fear, death, love and loneliness, beauty and the ugly. And what is Night City, the city of dreams, if not a meeting place of all of these? To quote Christopher Evans' article that I showed earlier, this is our basic instinctual repertoire. This place is not a dreamy success story. There's no happy ending. In fact, Night City is a far truer portrayal of a dream than you would ever think. Scientifically speaking, with all its weirdness, apathy, and unpredictability, it's pretty bang on. And that is not good. To be a bit ham-fisted about it, Night City is the human baseline foundation given concrete flesh. This is what happens when human impulse and human instinct is left to run amok without any of the good things that humanity is capable of. Selflessness, kindness, discipline, self-reflection. It's a place that consumes all the good things it touches. It appeals to us so much and can swallow people whole because we all have that side of us. And that's not to say that all of these things that are a part of the human instinctual baseline are bad. It's a part of who we are. But as things tend to go when they get really extreme, it gets a little messy. As we see in Cyberpunk, the people who leave Night City do so like a symbolic rebirth. Waking up from the nightmare of their own weaknesses, these people almost always do so with a desire for a better world. They have a desire for fairness and peace, things that require the recognition and restraint of the vices that Night City thrives upon, where might always, inevitably, equals right. Everybody here is terrified in this permanent state of feline hell. Cyberpunk's world isn't that of a mere fantasy. It's a dark mirror of our own reality. In reflecting the world we live in right back at us, Night City asks us, wordlessly, to really think about what we're seeing, both in the fabric of this city of dreams and in the world we're forced to live in.